come off of King Street, right, to get to us? Is
You
that where
know,
you?
if you go,
I'm not, how about?
Was it ready?
like your company?
Okay. All right.
Travel walk down.
Pleasant Street.
I need some heavier pen.
The Y.
One in there.
Okay.
The right, that's Pleasant
All right,
Street.
here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the March 10th, 2020 Norfolk Planning Board meeting. Please be advised that tonight's meeting is being recorded, both audio and video, for home consumption. Should we call on the audience to give them an opportunity to speak, please use a microphone. It's not for those in the room, it's for the audience at home. We can hear you fine, it's just those folks need the microphone. All right, our first order of business this evening is we can't get that till 7:15, can we?
We have appointments.
We have appointments at 7.
Yeah, we have appointments at 7, right. First is Norway Farm subdivision. Okay, request for bond reduction. Rich, why don't you lead us through that?
Sure. Mr. Kane had requested a bond reduction for some of the work that he had, and we being myself, Barry, and Mr. Kane went out to Barry La Riviera, the Assistant DPW Director, just for the record, sorry, to go out and take a look at the berm that's on the binder coat, and there was a question that came up when the updated numbers came from Tetra Tech about quantities and whether he could get a reduction in the bond estimate that they had prepared. And so, from going out into the field, the conclusion was that while there is the berm is on the binder coat right now, when it gets to do the top coat, it's going to have to be milled out, because essentially what we want to have DPW promotes is a monolithic berm, so we want to make sure everything pours through nicely. So the conclusion was that when it comes time to get the top coat, some of that will have to be milled out, and then it will be poured in with the top coat.
Yep.
And one of the things we learned as we're out there with Mr. Kane too is that the original one had did the paver, did it by hand, putting the berm along there, as opposed to the machine coming to do it. So that was,
Irregular.
yeah, there's some irregularities there. But what Barry had done was taken the numbers from Tetra Tech and he updated them based on quantities, and he incorporated those quantities into the top coat. And so the net result was that the bond came down to 274, cost to complete, versus the 290.
Right, okay. We have in your package, we've got the bond numbers in front of us. Any questions from board members?
Nope.
From the applicant? No. Okay. All right, then the chair will entertain a motion to reduce the bond for Norway Farm subdivision from $290,391 to $274,393.
So moved.
I have a second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you. Have a good evening, guys.
You too.
Well,
Yeah, okay, yeah. Next item is Wrights Farm Road, the preserve at Keeney Pond, request for curbing modification. The applicant will state his case. Up. Microphone.
he didn't listen to us.
Willing to change the curbing from sloped granite to the monolithic berm you just spoke of.
Yep.
So Barry had asked me to put in a modification to make this change, so.
So this requires a motion to make it a minor modification, I believe, and then a motion to approve that, if I'm correct.
Correct.
All right, so we need a motion to,
Well, we did send out notice to all the homeowners in there, so I don't know
all right,
if
okay, so if there's any,
but-
that's true. If there's any homeowners in that area that would care to speak, please do so.
Guess not.
Seeing none, all right.
Sorry.
We need a motion to make a minor modification to the curbing at the Wrights Farm Road, Keeney Pond Preserve from sloped granite to monolithic berm.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And now we need a motion to, well, what's the proper language, Rich, for the second motion?
Yeah, vote to modify the curving from, it was slope
Yeah,
grid, right?
Granite
To mo,
from, yeah, okay, we need a motion to allow the modification to monolithic berm.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you very much.
Those both sounded the
Next
same.
item on the agenda is sidewalks.
sidewalk. Yeah, so we had, if you recall, a few meetings ago, there was discussion on sidewalk talk about when somebody comes before the board and they look for a waiver about collecting money that would then go towards contributions to create additional sidewalks in town. So I had, since Barry was here on two other matters, it felt worked conveniently to have him just talk about sidewalks a little bit and the rationale why we would want to encourage the planning board to continue that policy of if waivers are granted, that there'd be money put aside. And but what we would probably be doing is doing things a little bit differently than had done in the past, and that's where I'm gonna just segue to Barry, and then I might fill in as we go along, so.
Okay,
Thank you for having me this evening. So Rich and I had some preliminary discussions, looking at the current fee, so it's $10 a linear foot. Our feeling is that that's a little low. We have a good pool of money that's been built up over the years, but moving forward, we want to look at adjusting that cost. So typically, when you look at installation of asphalt, it's done by the square yards. So part of what I did tonight is I have some other information I want to talk about sidewalks, but I kind of backed into a number. So for us to replace a sidewalk, let's say we have a pre-existing sidewalk that's bad shape, for us to go out there and do the work on it ends up being around $55 a linear foot. We have some developers in the room. It's always cheaper to put the sidewalk in during construction than post-construction. Some of those numbers, I've talked to a few developers, it's anywhere, that $50 to $75 a linear foot during that construction. So that $10 number per linear foot we were looking at, we definitely want to increase. So there's a window in there where we could raise that to. I think, it's have a discussion with the planning board where we think that number should be. We don't want to make it to the point where developers don't want to pay that fee. They want to argue about it, but we want to make something so the town can get a benefit out of it, especially moving forward.
now you have provided us with a map of the existing,
Yeah, so as part of the pavement management program that I did last fall, we coded all the sidewalks in town by street where they're located. So it's color coded by both sides of the street, left side, odd house number or even house number. I learned a long time ago that if you do left or right side, and depending on which way you drive down the road,
Doesn't work,
things
yeah.
change. House numbers don't change. So we have about 40 miles of sidewalk in town. And part of what I wanted to talk to you about tonight is implementing either a study to get an assessment of the current conditions of the sidewalk or study in full ADA assessment program. I went out and took some photos, so you can kind of see what the issues that we're having are all over town. I'm constantly getting phone calls from residents. We have a lot of sidewalks that are in disrepair, and mainly it's from the tree root intrusion. So here's a good example on Worcester Road. This subdivision was done a few years ago. The trees were put in the grass strip between the sidewalk and the roadway, and you can see how the roots of the trees are really disrupting the sidewalk. Rough cost estimate for repair, replace of sidewalks on Worcester Road is about $83,000. As part of this too is, these beautiful street trees that we have are gonna have to be taken out. We have to cut them, remove the roots. So that's another one. I'll be coming before the planning board for a tree hearing. So there's a few things we want to consider. Betsy, if you go to the next slide. So the slide on the top right, you can see the tree is actually on the back side of the sidewalk, not in the grass strip. but I'm having the same issues there as well. So we might want to consider, moving the trees farther off the sidewalks. Again, this is something Rich and I have been talking about for a while. We wanted to get together with the planning board, have some good discussion about how we can kind of remedy this in the future and look towards how we're going to fix this stuff.
Okay, thank you. For a while, the board has been considering what to do with substitute monies if a developer comes in and asks for a waiver on sidewalks. And we know that you have a sidewalk fund that is, last report by your predecessor, Mr. McGee, was, in December, was somewhere in the vicinity of $165,000, somewhere there.
Yeah.
And you also told us that you have a priority list that says,
Well, so that came out of the Complete Street study that we did regarding the Complete Streets funding. So looking at that, it's roughly $3.4 million worth of sidewalks. Now, the key to the Complete Streets is we have to have shovel-ready projects. I have to have the engineering and design ready to go, so then we can compete with the other municipalities for the pool of money that's available. So if I look at 25% of the $3.5 million, that's $800,000 in design that we need up front in order to be able to apply for the Complete Streets monies to get the grant so then we can install the sidewalks. So it's kind of a catch-22. When they kind of present it to you, it's all, hey, there's this money here. They don't kind of tell you need to do all this legwork. So as part of the Complete Street study, they ranked and prioritized our projects. Rich and I kind of went through, with our local knowledge and said, these are the ones that we want to look at. Right. One of the big ones that comes to mind is Route 115, from where we stop in North Street all the way to Millis. Yep. The sidewalk's in disrepair. It's a mess out there. My idea with 115, I've talked to Blythe about it a little bit, is I'd like to chase a tip project. I have drainage issues, roadway issues, sidewalk issues. I'd like to do that all as one, and then kind of look at the other projects we have in town, prioritize those, and see what kind of money we can get to do the design of the ones that we want. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we have a lot going on.
Sure. Well, we've drafted up a statement here that is indeed a draft, but nevertheless represents the ideas that we want to put forward, I believe. And I'd like to read it to the board now. I think the board members have a copy in front of them. If not, you guys got a copy of this? Let's see, my friend to the right here, left rather. It says, should be the policy of the Norfolk Planning Board to include sidewalks along the frontage of commercial and residential properties brought before the board for approval of new or repurposed development projects. Should the board agree to waive the actual construction of a sidewalk otherwise required by the zoning bylaws, the board will require a deposit of, and we haven't got the number exactly yet, but let's, for discussion purposes, use your $55 per foot of frontage into the Norfolk Sidewalk Fund maintained by the Department of Public Works for use in designing and constructing sidewalks in the town. So we will tweak the language on that, and that will become our standing policy. And Rich will give us a new draft of this next time we meet. Questions from the board on that?
Are all sidewalks assumed to be asphalt?
I don't know. Barry, you can answer that?
Majority of our town, sidewalks in town are all asphalt except for town center. Those are really our concrete ones. I have a few outlier pieces here and there, but for the most part, they're all asphalt.
And the pricing you provided before was for the asphalt?
Would be for asphalt replacement, yeah.
Barry, do you guys still have the strategy of looking over where we're missing sidewalks and trying to get as many sidewalks installed as you can to have connectivity to the
Yeah,
center
we
of town?
look at connectivity. That was a big part of the Complete Street study was
Right,
the connectivity.
That was the same years
Unfortunately,
ago.
the big gaps, we have the big gaps. Union Street's a big gap, North Street, so we have these large gaps. So, connecting the small subdivisions isn't a huge deal. I did get a call from a resident a couple months back. She was over in the Berkshire Estates area, and it was one of those subdivisions where the sidewalk went for a little bit, another guy came in, and there's gaps in that sidewalk over there. But it's tough to tell somebody that, that's a lower priority sidewalk versus Main Street. I have a bunch of people that use it. Yeah, your neighborhood uses that sidewalk, so, it's tough.
Yeah.
So, I'd like to use that money to do a full study and an assessment, so then I can go to the powers above me and say, I need X amount of dollars to be able to repair the sidewalks we have in town. And the other part of that would be the full ADA assessment. I know that's going to be an issue coming on the horizon soon as well.
Okay, any further questions or discussion on sidewalks? No. Okay, Rich, anything else you want to add?
Are you going to seek a vote on the policy tonight or
No,
our
I
next
think
meeting?
next meeting, I
Noodle
want-
it and then next?
I think we ought to tweak the language,
Okay,
make sure
all
we're
right.
comfortable with it before we,
Okay, all right, I just wanted to check.
before
Yeah, I
we
mean, if
vote.
we do something like engineering, design, construction, studies, kind of like get it all in there, so then we could utilize
Yes.
that money.
Yeah,
Okay, all right. No, I'll just work on some,
Because that was my only concern about, moving forward is, reading what was before, can I use that money for a study, or,
Yeah.
what can I do with it?
Yeah. okay. All right, thank you, Barry, appreciate.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right.
Thank you.
Let's see, next item is,
Any public comment on that?
certainly, please, grab a microphone, identify yourself.
Al Quaglieri, are you giving a blank check to raise this from 10 to 55 a foot?
We have not decided on what the number will be, but it'll be in that vicinity, yes.
Shouldn't there be some discussion before a vote?
Well, there has been discussion. Would you like to contribute to the discussion?
Yeah, I think that number's ridiculous.
Uh-huh. Too low?
Yeah, much too low. Should be
Yeah, that's what I thought.
$255 a foot.
Yeah.
Go
Yeah, I
from
was talking about-
$10 to $55?
But we're,
No
What's it
backup?
cost you to put in what does it cost you to put in a
Well, I'm not
sidewalk?
proposing the increase. Why don't we have some numbers here
Why don't-
on why does it actually cost that much?
I think what you should do, Barry, and that's right, because when a developer's doing a sidewalk with the construction site under, that's one thing. When you're going in and you're, first of all, engineering, even if it's minor, and then you're removing the organic soil, and then you're putting a gravel base down, then you're compacting it, and then you're putting on 2 coats, that's substantially more money than if a developer's in there and just puts the sidewalks in. So for your effect, it's gonna be much more money.
Yeah, John, you're 100% right. That's why there was such a wide spectrum. In your case, you're probably looking about $25 a linear foot. You're already there, you're doing the construction. So, there is a window there, and I think there is some discussion we could have together to find, we don't want to scare people away and say, don't come build in Norfolk because it's going to cost you an arm and a leg.
Maybe you can get a 100-foot section and assume it has to be engineered, stripped, gravel-based, and 2 coats on, and put a breakdown of each task of what it might cost, rather than just one flat number. And then everybody can see in, full view, the components of what you have to do.
Yeah, that wouldn't be a problem. We could pull that together.
Okay.
So we'll settle on a reasonable number.
I think that some frugalness is in order here. The tax rate is climbing, climbing, and climbing. You are going to push development out the door. All right, it's hard enough to develop in this town without going from $10 a foot to $55 a foot. I think someone should really be thinking about that aspect besides the actual numerical number of, what makes sense and what doesn't.
It does remain the decision of the developer to put their own sidewalk in, at whatever cost they can
There
achieve.
are plenty of spots, and I'll give you, for instance, on Valley Street, that nobody wanted sidewalks. So if
Understood.
I said I'll put the sidewalks in, you would have had a lot of angry neighbors. So that not every place wants a sidewalk. It was a farm town, and I'm assuming there's a lot of streets that want to remain a farm town.
Anyone else care to comment on sidewalks before we move on? Sir, grab a microphone.
I'd just like to say I actually agree with Al on this one. That seems like a very, very high cost per foot of sidewalk.
Okay, understood. Thank you. All right, the next item on the agenda is 6 Hill Street. Ted, you're going to present.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Ed Buchanan on behalf of the applicant, Nat Hunter with me today. Just following up on some of the things that we covered at the site visit, primarily a pretty big proposed change in the plan that we don't have revised plans yet, that we will have hopefully at the next meeting, fingers crossed, is to remove the salt from the site, salt storage, salt access, which will cut down on the height of the structure that was fairly large to allow that to be done underneath. Will also cut down on off-hour traffic with deliveries coming in times of bad weather. We wanted to take this opportunity, since we're not ready with a revised plan, and this is sort of a substantial change to what's been proposed, to at least reach out to the board on a couple of things. With that removal of that part of the use of the site, would the board, number one, reconsider the board's decision to require an impact study? Because an impact study is very costly, and without the salt there, it would really cut down on daily trips quite a lot, because during the wintertime, vehicles will be out on site. They'd really just come back in April and go out in November, and then there would be some traffic during sort of the April to November period, going out in the morning, coming to a job site, coming back in the afternoon for the landscape construction business. And so that's one thing we'd like have the board consider. The second thing is that we'll sort of waffle back and forth a little bit here, but we would respectfully request that the board possibly consider what the applicant has done to remove salt is to locate and acquire another site in Walpole to keep the salt. And to help sort of with the economics and offset that, the applicant would like to see if the board would consider very specific, two very specific tenants to allow them to operate here. Details have been provided. The applicant's thought would be that any approval of this board would be conditioned on these tenants. So if one of these tenants left, this applicant could not just replace these tenants, they'd have to come back to this board before another tenant could come in. And I have given you some details about those tenants. They're sort of similar to the applicant's April to November landscape construction business, which is in the morning, gather what you need, and then head off to the job site and come back in the evening. So one is a basement waterproofing company with 6 vehicles. 2 would leave at night, 2 would be stored inside, and 2 would be parked outside. Those are 3 F-550 trucks, 1 van, and 2 pickups. It's the pickups actually that would leave at night. 1 mini excavator, 1 mini skid steer, 8 employees total, and I haven't got into the nitty-gritty of the parking in relation to number of employees, because if the board says, nope, we don't want any tenants, then I don't have to do that work. So, so I'm not suggesting that the board would be agreeing with any of these numbers, simply that maybe the board would consider it. And then for storage, there'd be pipe, stone, concrete, tools, and some miscellaneous construction equipment, except that as far as all of that goes, all of that would be stored inside except for the mini excavator. And then the other, what's that? Stone would be outside. Oh, I'm sorry, and the stone would be left outside as well. The other proposed tenant is a lawn irrigation company that has 5 vehicles, 2 F-350s, 1 Ford LCF, 1 Isuzu W4500, and 1 GMC 2500. 2 of those would leave at night. 4 would be proposed to be parked outside overnight. They would, 2 indoors, and so 2 outside? Okay, sorry about that. 2 trailers, 16-foot construction trailers, and then 1 Ingersoll Rand air compressor, but that's not for use on-site, that's for use out at irrigation sites. And then the equipment that the company uses is 2 Ditch Witch puller trenchers, 1 Kubota U-25 excavator, 1 Cat 257 tracked skid loader. All equipment that's not on a job site would be stored indoors. Smaller tools are generally stored in trucks or indoors. That has 5 employees, seasonal, April to November. That business has no winter activity from November to April. There's no plowing, none of those employees are laid off. And then generally, the hours of operation, we would request comparable to what the applicant would, is 6 a.m. to 7 p.m., and not beyond those. The irrigation company says they generally work 5 days a week, a rare Saturday. You know, those, again, would the board consider those very tightly defined tenants, at which also they are allowed, they are able to keep a lot of their material inside. I did have some discussion with the town planner and the building commissioner just ever so briefly about this. Again, this is not something, if the board is at least intrigued, there are additional steps such as what parking would be required. Are these uses even allowed? Haven't even got that far yet. So we're not, if the board is at least something that the board would consider, there is some more work to do before we could determine if they could actually be able to rent on site.
So we would no tenants, then a tenant, of which we did the traffic count, and then we're back to no tenants. Now we got 2 tenants. And what's confounding a little bit to me, again, with the authenticity of this filing, as I've mentioned, we couldn't keep any equipment inside. Because the building, the 9,000-foot building, was already occupied with small tools and chains. That's a quote. We're allowed to see the building, quite dramatically stopped to enter it. Now we're gonna put vans, mini excavators, equipment, compressors, all in this same building. So again, the story just keeps to change with the wind as we go on. So the talk I had months ago about having overhead doors, which was the plan with multiple tenants and that. And so basically, if the board wanted this, you've got new traffic counts. I mean, if anything ever screamed, in my opinion, for a impact study, it would be adding this. Wow, this is a residential neighborhood. But as you know, when I spoke to you, if I can just get into something more basic for the board, I spoke to Ted in the site walk about the actually filing of this and the classification that we're filing under, because this classification was changed from corporate headquarters to professional buildings, business buildings, etc. And granted, the building inspector, who is the zoning chief, did agree with the filing. I talked with the building inspector, and I respectfully disagreed with what he said, and I had told Mr. Cannon I was gonna bring this up so that he would be aware that I was gonna discuss it. So the contractor headquarter, by definition, the initial filing that was changed, a building which serves as an office space and staging area for a building contractor, plumbing contractor, electrical contractor, excluding those contractors involved in the excavation or relocation of transfer of earth, which is heavy equipment. So by a contractor's yard, you can't have equipment. Now these allowed contractors, plumbing and electrician, et cetera, have to store all of their all of their equipment and vehicles inside. So in a contractor's yard, you've got to store all of your stuff inside. Heavy equipment you can't have. So now there's a change to commercial service. Commercial service is defined as a professional building, business office, or other commercial building provides goods and services other than retail. Definition of commercial, of course, is the transporting of goods and services, normally for a profit. When we look at the definition for a professional building, a group of buildings used for offices and facilities, accessory to the practice of, again, state licensed professionals, medical professionals, clergy, lawyers, CPAs, architects, engineers, or other members of a professional, a recognized profession. As in other, it talks about other members of a recognized profession, this is in Part B, shall not involve persons whose use of such building or groups involves manufacturing, fabrication, production, blah, 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 repair or storage of materials or product which are physically located on the premise. So in this section here, they don't allow repairs in the storage of materials. It does not address heavy equipment, it does not address vehicles or anything like that. But in the one that I would think would be a lot more liberal to the type of service this is, which is a contract. I mean, this is a contractor, and these other two businesses are contractors. And in the contractor's headquarters, and I brought this up probably a month before this change happened with the building inspector, it specifically says all of the plumbing contractor stuff, which are vehicles and whatever they have, vans, they have to be kept inside. And if you have equipment, as what's gonna be stored on this parking lot, which are excavators, front-end loaders, things like that, they're not even allowed inside. They're not allowed anywhere. So we go from this saying it's not allowed, so now we're under commercial service, which is a professional building normally for licensed state practitioners, and now all of a sudden we can have all this stuff and we can have it outside. You hit the floor. That was my conversation with Ted. I told him I'm gonna bring this up. Again, the zoning person said he thought this was fine. I did disagree with Bob, and I told him that. I just talked about this with Rich. I don't see anywhere where in these two filings this is allowed. Rich gave me a list of people that had excavators on their site. When you look at some of those businesses that had, like the Roweens up on Valley Street, filed under a contractor's headquarters, he really shouldn't have his heavy equipment or excavators outside, which he does. So, not to say that because they're doing something against their filing and their site plan to mean that we can have something else. So I just don't see how a professional group of buildings all of a sudden has vehicles and heavy equipment and tools and equipment and supplies stored outside when the actual contractor's headquarters doesn't allow it. So I don't see where the town of Norfolk allows heavy equipment to be in full display outside. And what compounds this is that we're a mixed district abutting residential properties. And again, if you have the vehicles that were allowed, they have to be indoors. So they don't want the electricians marked pickup trucks. They don't want their vans. They don't want the utility trucks. They don't want them outside. They want them inside if you're going to be under this contractor yard zoning. So I don't know we've got the basis to move on here because I don't see it in the writing. I don't see it in any of the language of the zoning. And granted, our zoning is less than definitive in many cases, but if you can show me where I'm wrong here, I'd be happy to listen.
You did mention that briefly at the site visit, Mr. Weddleton, but I haven't had the opportunity to look in depth at that, so I'm not prepared to get into that
Okay.
in detail, other than to, at first blush, say I agree with the building commissioner. But otherwise, that's certainly, I understand the concern and certainly would address that.
I will remind you and everybody else that in the building inspector, the F-111 was approved, and obviously, with what we see going on here, is substantially different than the conversation during that F-11, and adding on multiple tenants, contracting tenants in a, so obviously we've got a lot going on here, but.
Wait. This is, you're blowing this way out of proportion.
No, I'm not.
Okay, no, you are, because first off, you've mentioned several times overhead doors, comments from my client about overhead doors. Prior to his purchasing it, he mentioned to the owner of Island Lighting, who was there, who used this property way more intensely than anything that the applicants proposed. He said, well, geez, maybe I could do that without knowing anything about the zoning or what he could do.
That wasn't relevant to what I just said. All I was saying is, from way back, Ted, is that when he talked with Jim O'Neill, he said he was putting in 3 overhead doors. That was it. That's all I said about that. I'm talking about the use and what's going in here. And my reference to the F-11, the F-111 was that we see the complexities of this filing, and if the F-11 was approved, nothing would even be checked, including the drainage and God knows everything else. So obviously, we have a different type of business setup here going on than I think was what was discussed at the F-11. That's what I'm saying.
No,
And
it's-
and on that same ground, what I'm saying is that, and I simply disagree. I mean, they can appeal, they can go to the ZBA and give their case and let someone else. All I'm saying is I just disagree with what you're filing under. The board may have different ideas, Rich may have different ideas. It's my own opinion. That's all.
All the applicant is asking for tonight, the applicant, based on all of the feedback, has removed salt storage and salt transportation from the site.
I understand.
The board is, the applicant is simply asking the board, would the board consider these tenants? Very tightly defined, then the board could say no.
No, I understand that. I'm going back to the initial premise of, is this filing proper? Is this filing under this use proper? That's all. This is the initial, this should be done square one, step one. This is the first thing we should be going. And of course, it wasn't all incorrect because your filing changed midstream. So you did change from contractor headquarters knowing that, wow, we gotta keep the trucks and the vans inside and you gotta keep earth moving equipment out of here. So, you know, I'm not off on a tangent someplace because I'm just simply saying from that change, now you're talking about a professional building that hires licensed professionals, and I'm not seeing this fit, that's all. That's all.
Okay, yeah, sir, I understand.
Okay.
I mean, I agree with the building commissioner.
I know you
If you
do.
like, I'll get
I know you
into
do.
it. Yeah, sure, but I'll,
And that's fine,
you
we
know,
could
answer
disagree.
the, you know, before the board votes on it, I'll certainly, you know, address that concern.
Okay, that's all,
right.
all I'm saying.
But, you know, again, but to paint this as this, you know, tremendous use, it's really not. And again, the request is for two tightly defined tenants, which the board could say, no, we don't want any tenants. We don't want that. So,
I guess tremendous use is relative, but when you have 45 pieces of equipment, trucks, plows, loaders, outside in a residential zone on an acre-and-a-half lot, I think that's a substantial use.
it's a commercial, you know.
All right, I'm just going by what you told me months ago, that's all.
It's a commercial, it's zone commercial.
I understand.
Okay.
I
So,
understand.
yeah.
But the impact study, as we talked about, is for this exact reason, Does this disturb the impact study, which covers the subjectiveness of this whole filing? We're here on the site plan as the board. The impact study and the special permit covers the subjectiveness of, is this disturb the way of life in any way for the abutting neighbors? That's the special permit, which ties in with the impact study, which is why the board suggested it.
And I would
That's all.
suggest that what really it appeared to me to move the board to ask for an impact study was the salt storage, the size of vehicles coming in, the size of the storage shed, the noise that these vehicles would make, at what hours of the day and night would they be coming, all of which has been eliminated.
Understandable. I mean, they may have different, I just thought it was
Right.
because of the site of this balloon thing from the Everett Street houses. That's why I thought that that was a great idea to move that.
That was one part of it, but it also odd hours, trips, and then also noise associated with that, noise associated with deliveries of salt, noise associated with transferring the salt off-site, cuts down on a number of trips, cuts down on size of vehicles at the site, and cuts down on the volume of trips. Given that, we're just using this time that we have before we have a revised plan to come back to the board to ask the board about those two things, the impact study and whether the board, you know, because we have said no tenants, and that's what we're proposing. We're just asking if the board would consider that. Then I can take the next step and go into more details to see if these tenants even fit. If the board says no, what you've proposed, we're not even sure if we're good with what's proposed, then fine. I don't have to go into the details on those. But we're just asking.
Let me ask Rich, let's go back to the original issue that John has raised, because it did come up before. We did test it with the building inspector. But, Rich, you want to comment on what John has raised?
Well, I think if there is first of all, if there's a consensus, at least a majority of the board that questions the use category, I think we need to get, you know, we're going to need to have to investigate it further, because otherwise they're not going to move off the dime on it.
Yeah, I understand. I
And
understand.
So that's certainly point number one. I mean, there's some fundamental things here, and then there's some more specific things. And then I've written this in there. So one is that you have use categories that you have within the zoning. it's not gonna cover every particular aspect of how different uses operate. And not all uses operate the same way. So they're generalized categories of uses. And in this particular case, interesting enough, under contractor's headquarters, it says all vehicles have to be within a garage, but yet in the same zoning bylaw, it allows by special permit to be able to park vehicles,
Commercial vehicles.
and this is vehicles, so it says all vehicles, so commercial vehicles would fall under under vehicle. So there's conflicting pieces within the zoning bylaw that you have to make some interpretations on. And sometimes interpretations, people agree or disagree.
And don't forget, commercial vehicles don't include land moving equipment that are not registered and licensed to go on the road.
And I'm just specifically, we'll talk about vehicles as not excavators. Let's talk about these pickup trucks that are commercial vehicles, right? A box truck, is that a commercial vehicle?
Well, stick to the original filing, don't leave the tenant issue aside for a moment.
No, what I'm just saying is, there's interpretation of the zoning bylaws and how you apply them as it relates to uses. And I appreciate that, the issues being raised. Now, if and this is what we talked about earlier this morning, is if you're going to put in a different tenant, then it needs to go through the F11 process, determine if the use is allowable, and then either agree or disagree and then appeal it. Because I think where we are now, where we landed, is that everything is being scrutinized to the nth degree, either for the negative or the positive. So to kind of adjudicate this, I think we're gonna have to, I would like, if the board disagrees that it doesn't fall under a commercial service, then we're gonna have to get a determination from the building inspector, issue that, and then they can either appeal it or some agreed party can appeal it. Because that's where, looks like we're kind of headed.
Yeah, I understand.
Well, if the board decides to override the zoning inspector, I think I read in this, Ted, if we decide to override his use, we have the right to do that on this.
Override the building inspector's
For the
interpretation?
use, yes.
Board can do whatever the board
That's what I thought.
elects to do.
That's what I thought.
However, there's a bunch of people in the audience here, and I think they've pretty clearly articulated their concerns about the development. And so there's a high probability that if we don't kind of get to the bottom of this commercial service or not, it's going to be in litigation, one way or the other. He might appeal it, or some aggrieved party might appeal it. So we're kind of at a standstill, I think, at this point.
Well, the appeal is to the ZBA.
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
if we wanted to, if this was in doubt, if the planning board wanted to just acquiesce and not even make a decision, we could hold up and have them go to the ZBA and let the ZBA decide right there. So
and I-
don't waste any engineering money or anything.
right. I think we've kind of arrived at that particular point. It seems to appear to me.
So,
Well, we relied on the building inspector's adjudication of the, when the filing was changed, and have been
And there's just.
running on that basis since then.
Correct, and there's disagreement of that opinion, which is understood,
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
If there's enough of the planning board that disagrees with that interpretation of commercial service, then we need to kind of get to the bottom of it for the people in the audience and for the applicant, one way or the other.
exactly. So no extra money is spent if we were in disagreement on the use. Exactly.
Yeah, so,
Yeah, so,
I guess I would
gentlemen,
kind of defer to the rest of the board on at least
thank you.
their initial thoughts, yeah.
Thank you, exactly. Gentlemen,
I don't know what's being asked of us.
well, what's being asked of us is to determine whether we agree with the second filing, which is under, what is it, John? Under
Professional buildings.
professional building and commercial services.
No,
Commercial-
commercial buildings.
Commercial building?
Just for the record, it's commercial building,
Commercial buildings.
commercial service, my apologies.
Commercial service, that's what I thought it was.
Rich, what page is that?
Page 5, that's the definition.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I spoke very briefly with Mr. Weddleton. I had not anticipated this, getting into this in depth.
Yep.
I would respectfully request, if we've got to the point where the board is going to make a determination on this, I would just respectfully request a continuance so I could brief it for the board, and at least have an in-depth look at the bylaws so that I could give the
Yeah.
board my 2 cents worth.
The language
Well,
is
that may-
the language is exactly a professional building, business office, or other commercial building which provides goods or services, which is commerce, other than retail as its principal function.
understand.
That's what they filed under.
Sir, I understand your point, but I want to hear some
Oh, yeah.
comments from the board here.
I just want to catch you before you voted.
I don't know what are we
So-
commenting on?
Essentially, what you're being asked is what you've heard so far of Hunter Environmental, how they operate their business. Does it fit within the box of commercial service as a defined use under the town of Norfolk zoning bylaws? Because if it doesn't fit within those 4 corners of it, then is there some,
Or does it fit under the contractor's headquarters,
now, if you,
which is what the original filing was?
however, if you look at contractors' headquarters, equipment that Mr. Hunter would use is very similar to the same type of equipment, doesn't say the size and scale of them, that somebody in earth removal business would use.
So are we looking at the original submittal or an amended submittal?
His new submittal is commercial buildings,
So
professional
we're
buildings.
being asked if
Right.
our opinion of whether the submittal is a commercial building.
Not commercial service, what you've seen thus far? There's nothing new yet. It's that he has a snow removal operation.
What factual information do we have to make a judgment on?
We have a description of the business that he has provided.
They're saying that this
I
here allows them.
understand the bylaws.
Oh, okay.
I got that part.
Okay.
I don't understand what's being asked of the applicant or the neighborhood, right?
I can explain it.
That's all right, hang on.
Being asked is that this particular applicant, Hunter Environmental, is in the business of snow removal. So what that means is he has sanders, he has plows, he has front-end loaders that are used for snow removal, and in the off-snow season, I'm sure he's using them for other purposes that, he may or may not be, but anyway, the principal business is snow removal. So he originally had salt they wanted to keep on the site to be able to bring to client to use back and forth. That's part of snow removal operations, sidewalks, parking lots, et cetera. What he's taking that off the table right now. What he's doing is he's operating a snow removal business and that's where it's located out of, and there's plows that are stored there. There's vehicles that are stored there. There's things associated with
So
snow
we're being
removal.
asked if a snow removal service is a commercial service?
If you would view that as a commercial service,
Or would you view it as a contractor's headquarters, which was the original filing?
That's not what's being asked.
It is what's being asked.
Well,
It is
They're
what's,
asking to us to say whether it's a commercial service or not.
Again, there's nothing, they're filing under this zoning. This one sentence here, and there's nothing here that says commercial service. It says a building, professional, a business office, or a commercial building that provides goods and services. That's the zoning, that's the use. Whatever his business activity he's told us about is gonna be included in those parameters. That's it, simple as that.
and that's what the building inspector, the chief zoning enforcement
He said it
officer,
did.
is,
He said it
says it
did.
fits.
Correct.
John has raised the issue that he doesn't think it fits. So we're being asked to, or I'm asking you to consider whether John's point is valid, or whether we stick with the determination of the zoning
The
officer.
catch-22 is it really fits under contractor's headquarters, but
You
it
can't
specifically says the trucks have to be inside, and you can't have unregistered heavy equipment outside.
Right, the only thing you can have outside are your
Storage, supplies
storage
and
for
material.
supplies and materials
Correct.
that
Yep.
are screened.
Exactly, exactly.
So anyway, that's
That's it.
where we're at.
We're filed under here, but now they're filed.
Chad, Gary? Thoughts?
My thoughts are that he's providing commercial services out of a commercial building.
Okay. Chad, how do you feel about it?
I gotta think about this.
Yeah, I know.
I don't think I can make a decision on that right now. I need to think about this.
And that's a very valid point. So I think you need to be able to just
Sure.
say what what you would need to be able to get to that point, I think, is kind of where we're at now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Anything else, Aaron?
I think this is a very difficult conversation to follow. I think we would benefit from the applicant summarizing it as requested. And I think it would the applicant would benefit from a summary of the board's conversation as well.
Mr. Quaglieri has something he'd like to contribute.
I would. Could you clarify, is it being applied for under commercial services?
There is no commercial service use. It's being complied, yes, I'm sorry, the title of it is commercial service.
So to do a litmus test, John, commercial services is allowed in the on-highway. And by a matter of default, because it's allowed in the on-highway, it's allowed in the off-highway. So if you took this business with all those parking spots and brought it down to Pond Street, 115, and applied for a permit from Bob to move all these sanders, plows, mini excavators, 25 pieces of equipment, do you think he would give you an F-11 for that? And the answer is, I could tell you no, because he's denied it many times. So if it doesn't fit in the on-highway, and it wouldn't be allowed by the building inspector in the on-highway, how then could you call it commercial services in the off-highway?
See, but my whole thing isn't on the commercial service. My whole thing is storing equipment and vehicles. If a contractor's yard says you can't have unregistered heavy equipment and any commercial vehicles have to be inside, how can you just say, okay, then you could put them all outside and keep them under a commercial building, professional building zone, that's all.
Now, I'd like to go on and say I feel bad for David because he bought the property with an F-11 that was no good. And because of that, he passed papers and he's in this situation. That doesn't help the neighborhood at all, or my development. I'm being selfish here. I have a residential development across the street that I can't do if he gets permitted for this. I'll just bring that out. It's plain and simple. And, I was brought to a town meeting to change that zoning so I could do that because that's what the neighbors wanted for that parcel. So I just, not to add fuel, but I just pulled some of this off the internet and, it talks about demolition, construction services, excavation, pictures of excavators. So I don't really know how that's commercial services.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Quaglieri. Ted?
At some point, could we get copies of those? And I have no idea where those come from, so.
Yes.
Sure, by all means, you can have copies of those. Well, I think we've got to the point where you need to, one more time, describe that business to, we'll get to you in a moment. Describe that business to us one more time. And then we need to go back to the issue that John has raised, take into consideration the zoning enforcement officer's recommendation or decision, and then as a board decide whether we think it ought to continue on the filing, the heading, or go back to commercial.
And again,
contractor's
not to be
headquarters.
redundant, I'm not saying he doesn't have a commercial operation. That's not my issue. My issue is storing equipment and heavy equipment, both registered and unregistered, outside. That's my issue, not what he does, not how it's operating. Commercial can be a bunch of different, my thing is, if you can't store this stuff under a contractor's headquarters, what makes you think you can store it under the same usage that provides for licensed professionals. That's all. That's what I'm saying. Why is the equipment not allowed here, but okay, you can put that?
And
That's
the
it.
answer is our bylaws aren't clear and they require an interpretation.
Probably.
Oh, exactly. I
But
mean,
it is interesting that initially, none of the equipment was to be stored inside, and yet the tenants are gonna store all their equipment inside. It's just a controversial point there. Rich, would you read a little bit about storage? You read to me earlier today about storage in that area.
You talk about outdoor storage?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, under section J4B1B, outdoor storage, this is in the C1 zone. Under number 3, all other outdoor facilities for the storage of fuel, refuse, materials, and/or equipment shall be screened from view with a solid fence structure and located to the side or rear of the building to which is accessory. The fence shall be a reasonable height, a minimum of 6 feet, and the enclosure shall not exceed 1,000 square feet in area, except by special permit from the planning board.
So there's another, to your point earlier, there's another point about storage, which is apparently in conflict with contractor's headquarters.
well, let's take the definition of buildings professional. Let's take the definition. Repair or, in the exact zoning definition, repair or storage of materials and product which are physically located on the premises, not allowed.
We're missing the point, which is, it's unclear. They've asked for an interpretation. We need to give an interpretation.
We do, yeah, we do, yeah. All right, now, to your other points, in terms of impact statement, in my view, removing the salt shed and the salt operation has a favorable impact on the operations of that business, because it, as I understood it, and I could be wrong, but as I understood it, it eliminates the off-hours work. And it's now a 7 to 5 type of business. Now, that doesn't, in my view, eliminate the need for a traffic study, because there's a lot of vehicles coming and going at different times of day and different times of seasons, et cetera, et cetera. But it probably does eliminate the need for the noise evaluation, because if you eliminate front-end loaders going in there and scooping salt and dumping them in a truck, so you've cut the noise level way down. It's but there are other elements of an impact study that Rich could articulate, and we could go back and describe we think it's appropriate or we don't think it's appropriate.
Under section 3.3.2.21 of the planning board rules and regulations for site plan approval, impact studies and assessments, the applicant shall inform the planning board of any and all impacts that the proposed development may have on the abutters, neighborhood, community, and town. These impacts include the aspects of traffic, water supplies, solid waste disposal, sewage, stormwater drainage, police and fire protection, and infrastructure in general, as well as environmental contamination issues of noise, water, air, etc. The applicant shall also include measures which will be implemented to mitigate the results of these impacts. And then it goes on, like a
So when you listen to that list, really the one that stands out is the traffic. Yeah, yeah.
I think that's certainly fair. I think that makes sense, yeah.
Any other comments on that point from the board?
No, that makes sense.
Okay. Now, as to the tenants, let's see if there's any initial thought from the board. We're not going to give you a final definitive on that tonight, but initial thoughts from the board. We'll start with Chad.
Well, I mean, I think we need to get clarification on the use before we can even talk about the tenants. It's kind of a moot point.
Gary?
I didn't have anything else to add. I believe we're going to work collectively to get an opinion and so we can talk about it between now and the next meeting or at the next meeting.
Right, okay. Aaron?
I don't know that the use is as relevant as we're making it out to be. I think they've applied for a special permit, which allows interpretation. They're working with the neighborhood to try to come to
Yep.
an agreement on what an allowable use is, and we need to make a ruling on that.
Indeed.
I think it needs to be made perfectly clear what that use is, what they at least perceive the impact to be on the neighborhood, and then we can make a decision.
The question, though, was on the tenants. What's your initial thought on?
I think if the tenants are part of their use, then they can say, this is how we intend to use the property, and
Okay.
allow us to make a decision.
Fair enough. John, anything else you want?
No.
Okay, well, there was a lady in the back who probably proceeded, you wanted, she's decided she doesn't want to comment.
I just have one additional question for the applicant. If he's still gonna run a substantial plowing business out of there, just not salt?
Yeah, the plowing, as he's described it to us, he puts the equipment on site in November and leaves it there till April. And it does the work on site at various places around greater Boston area. And then he brings it back, parks it in the summer, repairs it and tunes it up in the fall and gets ready to put it out on the sites again in November, something like that.
So when I used to have a lot of snowplow equipment myself, and if something broke at 2 in the morning, then we had, people at the shop ready to fix it. So if he's gonna have that amount of equipment, is it all gonna be, gonna be coming back in the middle of the night to fix hydraulic hoses, leaking, broken plows? I mean, it's not a business that's low maintenance, I can tell you that from experience.
We haven't heard that part of the description from him, Al. Anything else?
You probably,
Oh, the A&R, we gotta talk about the A&R.
yeah, we do talk about the A&R. But I think you said there was some other person that raised
No,
their hand.
she raised,
You addressed the.
lowered her hand.
Oh, okay.
Betsy, grab a mic, please.
Elizabeth Whitney, 26 Valley Street, Pondville, and I'm going back to 2013, when at town meeting, a bylaw was passed allowing residential development by special permit. And it was presented to the people at town meeting as plans for developing on Valley Street, Old Pond Road, and Hill Street residentially, because that's the way the neighborhood and the town, I've said this before, it passed 61 to 16. The town was very committed to development that was residential in Pondville. And Pondville really is Pondville proper, Valley Street, Old Pond Road, and Hill Street. Everett Street, definitely. Everett Street has been residential since the late 1680s. When the bylaw passed requiring a special permit for commercial or industrial development, it was a huge victory. And I'm still hoping that that victory will reign here. I am very concerned about any commercial industrial development on Hill Street to begin with. But the best we can do is have as many conditions, as many stops, as many controls as possible. An impact study, apparently, I don't know that much about them, and from what I've found out, I don't think very many of them have taken place in Norfolk, have they?
They have not.
So this is new territory. It seems critical that we have a very good, very in-depth, and thorough, and time-consuming, carefully done, written up. I don't know who's paying for it, I would assume it's the applicant. But this is the way it goes. We worked very hard in 2013 to get the bylaw passed that allowed residential development by special permit. I remember that night well. This is a very passionate subject to me, which everybody knows. So thank you for listening. I will hand the microphone over, if that's okay.
Sure.
Thank you, Betty. I just have one question. When we do the walkthrough, all the equipment is alongside the building, right? Now, I know the fire department said they wanted access around the building. Now, is that walkable access or a driveway?
I don't think it was defined, but I think the solution was to move the fence out, which they're going to do, another 12 and a half to 13 feet.
Right, but you won't, I mean, you'd be able to walk down there, but I don't think you'd be able to drive a vehicle down there.
Well, you could probably drive a pickup truck or a small vehicle down there, yeah. You
Could
could.
you check with the fire department, make sure that's acceptable to them?
My recollection,
They
Mr.
have that access on that side of the building?
My recollection, Mr. Chairman, is the fire department was happy with access on 3 sides, and on that side where the equipment is shown on that plan, as long as they had ladder access, they were fine, is my recollection.
Is
But
that in writing anywhere?
but certainly, we could confirm that with the fire department.
I believe, I'll double check, I believe that actually we did get
Yeah, I think we do have something in
it
writing
from the,
somewhere.
from the fire department.
If we don't, we'll get it. Rich will reach out and if the letter isn't that definitive, as the attorney says, we'll make sure that the letter is amended to include that, all right? All right, Rich, will you follow up with that? Okay, thank you. Was someone else, yes, Peter,
Yeah, I just, with respect,
just address who you are.
yeah,
for the-
Peter 58 Everett, Peter Schmalzen. Just respectfully would request that the impact study for noise be reconsidered should the question come back about overnight maintenance, and should the tenants topic be opened up as an option, because overnight maintenance is a noise impact, as is 2 more tenants and therefore 2 equipment and activities. So would respectfully ask that that decision would be delayed until that information was available.
Well, yes, I understand, thank you. In considering the use that we're going to reconsider, we will expect a full description of the business from these gentlemen. And if it includes repair in the middle of the night of a broken snowplow or hydraulic hose, we want to know that. So, or is that going to be done in the field?
Right, right,
Or during the
right.
business.
So
Okay.
that would definitely.
Yeah, okay.
Attorney Cannon very well described some of the agreements made about the salt structure and the removal of salt loading activities.
Right.
I would ask the same question of these tenants and their loading activities. Again, that's for when the tenant topic comes up. But there was another agreement made at that sidewalk as well, and that had to do with evergreen plantings around the back perimeter area where they are gonna be scooping out. We were happy to learn they're not scooping out quite as far, but there was still a need identified for some landscaping around that, and I would respectfully also ask that that design would be included and documented, and if we need to consult with an arborist as to what are the right kind of trees that would provide effective screening, given the location and surrounding trees, that would be taken into consideration as well. Removal of salt and hours of operation, I assume with that agreement that we discussed would get documented as part of the next round of plans as well, so we're looking for that. Landscaping square footage also is an open question. I've asked Rich, and that's something that we review with once the new plans come as well. The last one is, as we're doing homework on interpretation of bylaws, I'd ask that also the outdoor storage screening be considered, because the current request is 52,000 square feet of storage screening, which basically says the entire perimeter of the property is the outdoor storage space. And when I read those bylaws, again, you guys read it tonight, it very much sounded like a separate entity that is dedicated towards the storage aspect and not the perimeter fencing of a given site. So it's another open question that I scratch my head about when I think about the project, and I would say it's probably something that bears discussion for interpretation as well. And I think that's all I've got for today. Thank
All
you.
right, thanks. All right, there's another topic that we need to talk about, and that's the land itself and the lots. There's a confusing history as to what deeds apply and what lots are on the record. And Rich has gone through an analysis which he's prepared to describe to the group. And you gonna put that letter up there, Rich? Or are you gonna read it?
Can you get it to the email? Just gotta read it, but
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Quaglieri raised this issue some time ago, and we promised him that we would resolve the issue, and it's taken longer than we wanted, but I think we're ready to do so.
email for the planning board,
Okay.
it was at 5:30, but, if you want to, you want to put up the plan now? The A&R plan? Okay. So this issue came up quite some time ago, so it was back in, the correspondence back in November, December timeframe, and discussion was, I'll start with actually the assessor tax maps. I think it's probably not a bad place to start, and then we can go off of that. So in 1979, Mary Gould applied for a variance to put an addition onto this building. As a condition of that variance, there was to be an A&R plan with reconfiguration of lots that she had owned. And what's an important point about where we are today was that the assessors had changed the tax maps based on an A&R plan that the planning board endorsed, but was never recorded. So if you look at the tax maps today, you'll see the 79 plan. Now, from what I can tell, going back into the records, Mrs. Gould did not add on to this building. Therefore, the need for the variance and exercising the variance and fulfilling all the conditions of the variance
Including recording that A&R plan.
and recording the A&R plan are not needed. There might be agreement or disagreement. 4 Hill Street, which is the house, goes back to the 50s. And the conveyance of that house through the deeds refers back to the 1954 A&R plan that was on record for that house, and carried forward. What really is odd and very confusing and poorly crafted, I guess I would say, is that when Mrs. Gould sold 4 Hill Street and 6 Hill Street to ILP Realty Trust, LLC, she did it from a deed, and the deed refers to Lot 2, which, if on the screen, is, I'll probably go over to the screen just to. Which, so this is 4 Hill Street, this is 6 Hill Street. The deed was for these 2 parcels, or parcel 1, parcel 2. And the deed from Mrs. Gould to ILP, you have to read the deed and go back to it and see that the description of it is for the whole entire area of this area, and then take that out, that was excluded from it. It doesn't say excluded. Subsequent deeds to Mr. Hunter individually has a, and HE, is it HE? I forget what it is, but HE excludes 4 Hill Street. The Mrs. Gould acquired this parcel here. She also acquired this a while ago, so the 1976 A&R plan that's on record, that was endorsed by the planning board, recorded, had lot, no, in front of me, I'm trying to think, lot 1, lot 2. And it describes, if you look at the deed back from the plan, it was 1951, I think the plan was, that she acquired. And piecing it together, she filed the plan in 86, the A&R plan, and she deeded out this lot from it and excluded that one. 2 subsequent deeds. So I think, again, there's interpretation of this, and probably people don't agree with me or disagree, but that poorly crafted for Hill Street at 228,000, I think it was 990. Does that say 90? 990. Technically, I think it should be 990 based on the other plan, so it's a little bit larger square footage. And then this is the second one deeded out. That they're 2 lots. Mr. Hunter's filed an A&R plan, which is this plan here. Approval not required plan. It meets the frontage requirements for the C1 zone, minimum 100 square feet, 100 linear feet, sorry. Hill Street's an accepted way, so the endorsement by the planning board would be to put this plan on record to clarify, essentially to clean up, if you will, what's on record with the assessor's office right now. This is actually not the plan, though. It's not the A&R plan.
Yeah, that's it.
Is it? Where's the note? The signature block? No, this isn't it. Oh, there it is. I'm sorry. Okay. As customary and people well-versed in subdivision control law and A&R plans, they put a notation on there, and I know this is going to be debated, but we'll debate. It's always kind of interpretive. That this plan is not a determination of compliance with zoning bylaw. The A&R plan is for frontage and access, and if it doesn't show a plan that's a subdivision that requires further approval, then it goes to the planning board. A&R plans are filed all the time by people to freeze in zoning. So it's not unusual to just file an A&R plan. So yes, that's kind of my phone I could read. I could be incorrect, but going through all the different deeds, it appears that if they put this plan on record, there's 4 and 6 Hill Street, and there wouldn't be a violation of zoning because this property was continuously conveyed out as a single-family house. The house was thereabouts built maybe in 1950. I forget the family. It wasn't originally the Gold. It was 2 subsequent owners. But
Plummer. You were
Plummer.
Henry and Patricia Plummer.
yeah, so
Best guess.
I think those are the facts. And correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't think I'm wrong. They didn't do the addition. So the idea of changing tax maps based on a variance plan that wasn't recorded kind of precipitated this thing to a large degree. And there was an internal battle with our own department, with the property owners, and try to correct this. And you can go online and look at the records of ownership, and it certainly doesn't match up with the history of this property. Because if you go online and you pull up that card, you'll find Mary Gould to you. And there's people in between, and they refuse to update our records. So you know,
Two things, Rich. One, could you tell us what town council had to say as you were investigating this?
so I forwarded the email from town council, essentially was that they could file this plan, A&R plan, it's entitled to endorsement on the plan board because it meets the qualifications, put this on record. And at least in their interpretation was that it can be done, it wouldn't be a violation as far as putting these two lots on record.
You've written this up, as I have
Yes.
seen, and that is available to the public to.
I emailed it to some of
Okay.
some of the folks that are on there, and the counter arguers of my points got it as well.
Thank you, Rich. Ted? Ted, you want to say something?
I'm just prepared to say something, but no, I have nothing to add to Rich's comments.
In the back.
No, I do object to that, Mr. Chairman. That's why I wanted to keep the microphone. I do want to raise the point that town council had mentioned in town council's letter, which is that this board shall, without a public hearing, endorse the plan. So there is no debate, there is no public hearing.
That's clear, that's clear, that's clear. Mr. Quagliari?
If I may, for the record, objection, just for the record.
Objection to?
Debate. There's no debate, Mr. Chairman. There is no public hearing on an A&R application, Mr. Chairman.
I'm going to hear what he has to say. It's not a debate, it's just a comment.
If I may, just for the record, Mr. Chairman, I do object because there is no public hearing for an A&R application.
I hear you. Mr. Quagliari, you may comment. This is not a debate, but you may comment.
Rich, is there a A&R plan with the check on file?
There is. Yes.
And that shows this identical, is it two different A&Rs? Like, the attorney for the town suggested two separate A&R plans in her memo. You sent it to me about half an hour ago.
Two separate A&R plans?
Yeah, individual A&R plans. That's what I read. Secondly, when this was submitted, this site plan was submitted, there was no A&R plan submitted with it. They submitted it and tried to tell this planning board that these were the lots, and they weren't the lots, and they keep referring to a 1954 plan. But in 1976, the 1954 plan went away. This recorded plan in 1976 formed one lot of 93,014 square feet. The 1954 plan no longer exists. So to refer to it on this mechanism was only to try to show the board that they didn't have a pre-existing non-conforming use and that their submittal would be expanding that use. That lot should not have been on their site plan.
I renew my objection, Mr. Chairman. This is debate.
I'm speaking, sir.
I renew my objection. I renew my objection, Mr. Chairman. This is public debate.
Avocado, public throw.
There is
I'm
no
speaking.
public hearing.
Let him finish. Your point earlier was that the board will endorse the plan, right?
2 points, Mr. Chairman. We have an A&R application that is not subject to public hearing, Mr. Chairman.
Being that I was rudely interrupted, may I finish, Walter?
You may finish.
Thank you. So I believe that was a purposeful submittal to circumvent an obvious zoning that sits on the ground today. Secondly, you can approve that A&R as the town council suggested, but it doesn't suggest that zoning, Rich just said that it doesn't violate zoning. It
That's
does.
right.
There's no zoning for a single-family house in C1D district. There's zoning for 4 units on 30,000 square feet, but no mechanism to create a lot, newly created, with a single-family house. So, if that plan was recorded, yes, it would meet the A&R handbook, but it would create a non-conforming use, and as I have been a victim in the past, Bob Bullock sent me a letter saying, once you've created a non-conforming use, he has to take action.
Well, I do know that in that zone, when it was created, it specifies that all residential should be a minimum of 4 units.
4 units, 30,000 square feet minimum.
But that is certainly grandfathered well beyond the creation of that
I think
zone.
what Al's saying is he's creating a non-conforming. I think what Al's saying, he's creating a non-conforming, which
You
I,
can't create hardship, so the house lot would need a variance with
for starters, thank you, Al, that's all, no more comments. Rich, we're going to endorse that A&R plan this evening, is that correct? Right,
I don't think that complies with town council.
I believe it,
Point of order,
the
Mr.
way I read it, it does, Al.
Okay.
Point of order,
What is your point of order, Mr.
just
Shipman?
a comment.
What is your point of order?
The A&R plan signed by the planning board gives some type of consent by endorsement.
That's right.
He can get his A&R plan approved by waiting the 21 days without you guys signing.
There's no reason that the board wouldn't sign it, in my view.
Except for some outstanding issues that are being brought up.
Thank you, thank you. All right, any further discussion on the A&R plan this evening?
No.
Just want to be clear, town council is saying that they agree with the applicant's interpretation as submitted.
Yes. Well, you can read the letter.
I read the letter.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Any further comments on this before we move on? From Ted?
Can you,
No? Okay, thank you.
you want to read town council's letter, pull it up so you could, for the pleasure of the board, so they can just,
You want to
I
do?
read the letter.
We've-
I've
I've
read
read the,
okay.
we've all read the letter, so
All right.
we're in
Read
good
it.
shape.
It's the letter you sent out this afternoon, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Ted, can I ask
we've
you a
seen that
question?
before.
Yes, I've seen it
Can I
before.
ask you a question? So we're creating this single, family lot.
No, you're not.
We're not creating a lot.
It's been in existence since 1954.
Yeah.
All right, so, because if you were creating it, you couldn't create it knowing that it needs 4 units on it, correct?
These are the historical lot lines going back to 1954.
Okay, so a separate question again, say this was being recreated. You couldn't recreate that because you need 4 residential units on a lot.
It's not recreated,
No, I'm saying-
it's memorializing what has been in existence since 1954.
No, I understand, but a straight Joe Schmo goes out and creates and subdivides a lot and has a house on one of the lots rather than 4 units. You can't create something that's non-conforming, correct? I'm not talking about this, just
No,
in general.
for an A&R plan,
Yes,
there is one inquiry. Does it have sufficient frontage? If
That's
those lots have sufficient frontage, there is no subdivision. It's not subject to the subdivision control law. That is the only inquiry. It's not subject to public hearing, and the board can sign or not sign. That is the only inquiry.
Can I respond to that, please?
No, we're done, we're done.
I submit this plan to you for review.
You may submit it to Rich, yes. I think he already has it.
This is the plan of record, there is no 1954 plan that shows a lot. That plan goes away with the recording of that plan.
And that's,
Am I wrong?
what I said was that, can you put this plan up? It's on the computer.
With the 1954 plan, creating the lot.
Is it the
76 plan.
motion to adjourn.
That's not the 70s.
That's the 70.
2 more meetings, one more meeting for you.
Recorded plan.
I have.
Then you can-
Well, it's pointless to argue about what's recorded and what's not. Our legal counsel did their title research and made a recommendation to us, so we're gonna proceed with that recommendation.
Yes, we are.
All right, for the record, this is the recorded plan. It doesn't have the recording information on it. Okay? All right. So this is endorsed plan by the planning board that matches the copy of the plan that they have that was recorded at the Norfolk Registry of Deeds. Mrs. Gould acquired this property minus 4 Hill Street from, I forget my notes who was on there, but
Doesn't matter. Mr. X, whoever.
Mr. X.
Yep, there you go.
from a 1951 plan. Before 1976. She acquired this house. When did she acquire the house, just for the record?
It's in the 50s. 73.
73.
She bought it.
The house was already built in existence in
Scots.
1954. I forget the family's name. The house has been there. It's been subsequently deeded based on the area. The Plumbers, okay. I agree. This is a bad plan. Okay?
No, that's the recorded, that's the approved plan, it's not a bad plan. That's
It's
the
a,
approved plan.
let me correct it.
All right,
Oh,
I'm going to call a halt to this, gentlemen. We're going to have this discussion offline because we've been through this once. If you
No,
want to,
Chairman, I'm sorry. I need to finish this point, okay?
all
Because
right, finish your point.
this plan is on record, I agree. The conveyance came off of this plan for 6 Hill Street to Island Power Light in 2016. And the house lot was conveyed on the same deed to Island Power Light from the 1954 plan.
That lot didn't exist anymore after 1976.
They excluded that house lot
It didn't
from the
exist
deed.
to exclude. It went away in 1976 when this was recorded. It is a single lot.
Okay, we understand we're going to have a dispute over this. We're going to do it offline and continue the meeting.
So if the board chooses to endorse the plan or doesn't choose to endorse the plan, it'll be recorded or not recorded, and then we'll have to part 2 of the conversation.
I understand the criteria for submitting an A and R. It's been explained to us by Mr. Cannon, Attorney Cannon. It's acceptable to me personally to sign that A and R plan. I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but at the end of the meeting, we'll lay out the Mylar and have an opportunity to sign it. All right, anything else, Attorney Cannon? No.
One last comment, please. This neighborhood was left behind in 1976.
You got to take the mic, Al. Al, you got to take the mic.
This neighborhood was left behind in 76 when they weren't required to record it. It was left behind when the tenant before Mr. Hunter wasn't required to get an F11. It was left behind again when he got an F11, Mr. Hunter, that wasn't allowed. And now it's being left behind one more time because you're just gonna sign away without doing your due diligence.
We've done our due, I disagree, sir. We've done our due diligence in this.
That's my opinion.
I understand that's your opinion. We've done our due diligence. We're going to, trying to clean up the history by accepting this A&R plan, which is what you asked us to do some months ago, by the way.
I asked to discuss it.
Pardon me?
I asked to discuss it.
No.
Because what they were submitting wasn't reality.
Enough.
Rich, when was
Enough.
this submitted for approval, this plan?
Next item on the business is,
Extension
When is that extension up?
tonight.
I'm sorry?
Need a continuance.
Need to continue,
We need to continue.
not
Yes,
the
we
A
do.
and R portion, application, that would be closed, but the public hearing.
Public
hearing.
hearing, we need a motion to continue the public hearing on the 6 Hill Street site plan, special permit for outdoor storage, stormwater and earth removal permits from, until rather, April 14th at
7 PM?
7 PM.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 He's nodding.
No, I said aye.
Okay.
Now, just point on the A&R
If you
plan.
don't sign that tonight, it's automatically approved anyway.
Yeah, I understand.
Right.
It's done.
Yeah,
So-
you
so-
made that clear.
This was,
The date is up today.
yes,
I'd like to sign
okay.
it.
Date is what?
The 21 days is up today, so if we don't sign it tonight, it's
Oh.
approved
Oh.
anyway.
Oh, okay.
No, just for clarification, when I spoke to Al, I know he stepped out of the room, but I didn't have the application and the check and so forth in front of me. So this was filed, I believe, January 6th, I think it was, if I recall correctly. So they granted an extension
Yep,
of time to act to this evening,
Yeah.
March 10th,
January 9th.
January 9th.
You're gonna be
Okay.
out here by 9.
So,
So we don't necessarily need to sign it because it'll just be.
so
It could be presented
So you don't have to sign this, it can,
It's already it's approved then, right?
yeah.
Yeah, there's no need to.
No need to sign it.
Yeah, there's no need for us to sign it.
I don't mind signing it.
Okay,
I
understood.
got enough time, I'll sign it after the meeting.
All right, next item of business is 7 Phillips Way, 19 Shire Drive, which is also now called 19 Shire Drive. Request for continuance till April 14th at 7:15 PM. Do we have a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, next item of business, 360 Main Street, Camger Coatings, special permit, site plan, stormwater. Did we read that into the
So for,
record, did we not, last time?
what's that?
This is a continuous, 360?
Yeah.
Yeah, right,
We had the
okay.
special permits tonight.
Okay, it's not-
Tho-
Continued from, yeah.
Those are
right,
new.
Right, continued from, what's new?
The special permit requests for parking in the front yard.
Do we,
and-
all right, do we need to read that in?
Yeah,
Do
yeah,
we-
you do have to read that one in.
Well, where is it?
We'll get the notice.
We don't got it, all right, but she's digging it out, so we'll get there.
Yeah, so parking in the front yard and as well as reduction in the required parking
Okay.
special permit.
Yep. Did you buy tickets to this, Phil? Did you buy
He's
tickets?
got today, he's all set.
Got DVDs for this one.
It still could end up short.
Huh?
Still could end up short.
All right.
Oh, boy.
Will the clerk,
Is this, oh,
You're on, Gary.
please
You're on.
read
Okay.
the,
I actually get to do something official. Notice is hereby given in accordance with Mass General Law, Section 40A of the Norfolk zoning bylaws, F.7.A, F.7.B, and F.7.E, that a public hearing will be held on Tuesday, March 10th, 2020, at 7:45 PM in Room 124 at the Norfolk Town Hall, 1 Liberty Lane, Norfolk, Mass., for DDMI LLC of Camger Coating Systems Incorporated, relative to a special permit application to allow a reduction in parking and location of parking in the front yard in conjunction with the proposed construction of a new 20,000 square foot industrial building at 360 Main Street. The site is located in the C3 zoning district, reference Assessors Map 2, Block 6, Lot 3-1. The application materials are available for public inspection in the office of Norfolk Planning Board during regular office hours, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., Monday through Thursday.
thank you. Who's here to present?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Katie Enright, and I'm a civil engineer with Howard Stein Hudson, working on this project with Camger Systems. I believe a few months ago, Stu Moncrief was here from my office to kind of give you an introduction of the project, along with Spec, who's here tonight, the project architect and systems engineers. Tonight we're here, we've added special permits related to parking. So the last time we were here, as you can see, the loading dock we've had situated in the front of the building. This is after many, many different trials as to how to use this building and how to provide loading. Essentially what we're doing is utilizing some off-site pavement on the other Camger property to accommodate, bringing in a large tractor-trailer truck to the front of the building, rather than adding an excessive amount of pavement essentially around the building and to the rear of the building to accommodate a tractor-trailer truck, which happens pretty infrequently. We have also added a special permit for parking. Essentially what we're doing is we're asking to essentially not pave the full amount of spaces required by the bylaw. Camger doesn't believe that they need the spaces, nor are they believe that they will grow enough to need the spaces. We wanted to make sure we showed you per zoning that the spaces could fit on the subject site, but would like not to pave all of them. So essentially what we're doing is asking to not pave 16 of the spaces. So out of, I believe it's 45, 16 of the spaces we've put into an area that's a different color hatch. So if we look essentially in this location here, we're calling those spaces land bank spaces, and so we're accommodating them for a pervious surface, but we're asking to not pave those spaces. So certainly if
Just a question, that shaded area, that rectangle you just pointed to, that's only 16 spaces?
Correct.
Okay, please proceed.
Right, so what we're asking to do is essentially show that we can accommodate those per zoning on the plan. Certainly if the building inspector or CAMJR needs them, or the building inspector notices there's a parking problem, we have the ability to build those spaces and fill that in, but for the time being, we'd rather not overpave the subject site. So with that, those are the two new items that are before you tonight. We did have a conversation with the fire chief, I believe Joe Meisner from CAMJR did, recently before he went on vacation. It's my understanding that a letter has not been received yet from the planning board, but the discussion that was had was that he was comfortable with the access of the site, and certainly we're looking forward to getting that letter from him. The other aspect of it was kind of the internal systems, which CAMJR is working on and Spec is working on with him to make him comfortable with kind of the interior fire systems, but certainly for fire access to the site itself, he was comfortable with that. The second letter we received, we were with Design Review Board last week, and I believe a letter was received this evening, which we were able to see. A few things that were discussed at Design Review Board pertain to the architecture of the building. We talked a little bit about the barn-like structure or the barn-like elements that we're creating in this industrial building to kind of make it a better fit for the neighborhood and kind of be reminiscent of the farm that's there today. The Design Review Board had some comments regarding pretty much the facade along the front of the roof line to see if there was a way that we could take this building and potentially add some elements to it to bring the roof line up a little bit and or add some elements that kind of went a little bit further with that kind of barn aspect of the property or of the project without necessarily affecting the entire roof line. Where this is a manufactured building, we really can't create a building with a larger pitch, but we had certainly started to kind of talk about and look at that. So that's something we'd like to discuss with the planning board tonight. Another comment from Design Review Board was similar to a comment we received from Beta, which was to take this green belt here and wrap it essentially to the street frontage. So Design Review Board had a similar comment, so we'll be working with our landscape architect to bring those 2 rows of evergreens towards the street while not impacting the sightline triangle that we have at the street. Design Review Board also wanted us to look at adding a farm-like tree in the front of the building, or something that you would see, kind of a big majestic tree. To do that in this area right in front or in this loop would cause a massive problem with my septic area. So we talked about kind of shifting it over again into that corner to kind of add an additional element to, when we bring those evergreen trees around, also adding a deciduous tree in that area to solve that without affecting the septic system area that we have kind of reserved in the front of the building. We've certainly also gotten a new letter from Beta, and I've gone through those comments. I can certainly be happy to walk through them. I think we're essentially comfortable with all of them. I think probably a third of the comments will be addressed by our stormwater pollution prevention plan and our NIPD's filing, which will happen later once we have a little bit more information about how we're going to stage the site and construct the site, details that kind of go along with the stormwater pollution prevention plan, and certainly we'd be happy to provide this board with a copy of that as a condition of approval once we're to that point. The water system has yet to be designed. I know that that was a comment about figuring out how the water was going to, or the details of the water system. We're proposing a well on site. We're proposing a water tank at the back of the site. The plumbing engineers have not gotten hold of this yet, so we don't have full drawings as to how that's going to be designed, what those pipe sizes are, et cetera. But again, certainly before we go for a building permit, we'll have to have all that information figured out. We are getting on the schedule to get back out there and do some more soil testing. I was out there, last summer doing soil testing. With the changes to the plan that have evolved kind of over time, our drainage areas have moved around a little bit, so we will need to go out and do confirmatory testing in rain garden towards the front of the subject site. We also have to do a confirmatory test to meet the septic regulations with the Board of Health in the front of the site, and we'll need to do an additional test in the new roof drain infiltration area, and also an additional test in the second rain garden to the back. At this time, we've used the test pit information that we do have from the subject site to make some assumptions in those areas, but we will be getting out in the next couple of weeks to make sure our assumptions are confirmed as those designs move forward into construction documents. We've also submitted a number of waivers that Beta was able to comment on, or actually reserved the planning board to discuss kind of tonight. The waivers that we are requesting relate to the material of the drainage pipe on site. So we'd like to not use RCP, we'd like to use plastic pipe, HDPE. We would like to, regarding the rain gardens, we'd like to not have a 15-foot berm around the top of those rain gardens. We'd like to not propose a fence around the rain gardens. And would like to not have the 10-foot tree buffer around the rain gardens. The first rain garden towards the front of the subject site, we've provided some shrubs to kind of screen it from the main road, but most of them are tucked pretty far back into the subject site, so you won't really get a chance to see those. I remember what all of the waivers were. Rain garden berm, rain garden tree easement, curbing for the subject site. So we've proposed slope granite curbing for the site, and also regarding the sidewalk along the frontage. So where there is no sidewalk out there today, we'd like to not address the sidewalk along our street frontage where it has nothing to connect to at this time. So we'd like to ask for a waiver from that. Regarding some of the other elements, I think most of the elements will be fairly simple for us to address. We've been working with the project surveyor to try to get some of them addressed, some of them that they're not able or not willing to address. We can continue to add details to the plans, like the abutters. We can work on making sure that all of the abutters are added to the plans per your requirements. I have a letter here that certifies to the pesticide and herbicide use essentially being compliant with the requirements, just to tick that box. I also have the illicit discharge statement to check that box with me tonight. And I hope that pretty much covers what we're trying to do tonight. I won't go into any additional detail really unless you have some questions or concerns related to anything. Certainly I didn't answer any additional information that you might need moving forward.
So, in terms of the Design Review Board, I heard you say essentially you're willing to comply with their requests, not directly, but at least indirectly, like move the tree and work on something on the facade of the building, possibly the roof or cupola or whatever they've recommended.
Certainly the vegetation, would like to certainly hear this board's opinion about the building itself before. We haven't made any changes to the building since last Thursday for the presentation this evening, so we want to make sure we get clear direction from this board tonight as to kind of how this building should evolve.
Well, I think the board would recommend following the suggestions of the Design Review Board, so.
Okay.
To that and to the degree that you can comply with them, it would be something the board would support.
Okay. Well, certainly on the vegetation, the aspects of the building I'll let Patrick speak to.
Good evening. My name is Patrick Kennedy. I'm the project architect for Spec Process Engineering and Construction, representing Camden Coatings. Regarding the facade that's in question right now, the Design Review Board recommended potentially extending the facade up in the front, basically, and kind of giving the barn look while leaving the rest of the roof as a current 2 to 12 slope. We have a little bit of concern on that it may not look architecturally appeasing, particularly when you come around the corner there on the side. It kind of looked like a Western, kind of like a Hollywood set, which is a concern for us, well, and I think in general for the building aesthetic. So we were, wondering how much of that is really, can we work with you guys a little bit on that, or, can we keep it the way we have it?
Can you pull up the elevation?
Yeah.
And you are able to make renderings of that?
Yes, and actually, I don't know if you have the new ones that we submitted to Design Review Board or not. because I did do a close-up now, because those two I had previously were pretty far away. Okay, yeah, so that's the back pad area. And that might be, oh, close, almost there. I think it's the next one.
Just
Yep,
the one?
yep. Ah, there we go, perfect.
You think it looks okay?
So again, we were a little concerned again from the comment of extend the facade up front. You know, you'll see the wall going beyond the roof edge, and the rest of the roof will remain the same. But then you'll see, you know, kickers either going back or some type of support from the side when you come around the bend there, where it doesn't look quite right. Just obviously looking from you guys
How
too.
big are the HVAC units going up there?
So
Where are they gonna be in the building?
they may not go up there. Currently, right now on the site plan, you'll see them on the ground, enclosed in a white picket fence. That was a potential option, but you know, if you guys say leave it on the plaid and leave the building like that, I think that would probably win out in this case. Versus, you know, obviously, if we were to put something on the roof, we would definitely talk about screening it and hiding it from the view, essentially.
So I actually don't see what's unpleasant about that image that you created. Was there some other comment previously in the presentation about it's a prefab building, and therefore this became difficult? Is that the reason why you... I thought it was a flat front from what you were describing, and it doesn't look like a flat front in that picture.
Please take the microphone, not for us, but for folks at home.
Yes, sure. Patrick. Essentially, so they were looking at this aspect of the roof and seeing if we could do something to possibly add a vertical element here on the roof instead of where this is the highest pitch we can really go with the prefab building. They were looking for us to look at some possible appendage to the roof.
Above that?
Above this to
Okay.
change the appearance.
Just on the front side?
Yes, that's
So
correct.
Let me
Yes.
jump in there, because I've commented on this at least twice, if not 3 times at this point, with no effect to date. But that front facade is 100 feet long. That's not short. Understand that the spec building is what it is, but something could be done volumetrically in front of that plane. An entrance could be created. A hole could be punched in the wall to make it look like a hayloft. You know, there are adds and subtracts that could be made to that volume to break it up so that it's not a 100-foot long, 45-foot tall
Slab.
decorated facade, right?
Okay.
There are volumetric changes that could be made to that. Granted that they're outside the box of a standard spec building, that's understood, but I still think I appreciate all the efforts that have been made out front from a landscaping effort. That's great, but it still doesn't hide the 100-foot long, however tall building it is. And I will again make the recommendation that something be done volumetrically. Again, with the entrance, if you pulled an entrance out, or call it an office, call it whatever you want, it would further block the loading dock from view, right? So just make the comment again, I think there are some things that could be done volumetrically to the front facade that would improve and make this structure fit into the town better than this proposal does.
So if you took 1/3 of the distance right in the middle of the building and you bumped it out 10 feet, something, I'm just trying to get a picture in my mind, something like that.
Like a little lobby or something. Sir?
If I could make a comment. One of the things that did come up with the Dan Iannuzzi, DDMI, Camden Coatings, one of the things that did come up with the design and review board is even something as simple as, you know, with some of the doorways, even coming out with kind of a little canopy over the doors, that would put some dimension there. And we had talked about, you know, even to your point of you know, not necessarily a hay hatch, but even putting something cosmetic up there with a wheel on it, just to give some kind of effect to that. And
Yeah, protruding beam, you mean with a wheel, yeah.
protruding beam with, yes, and then as well as, you know, some little facades over the doorways that at least would bring some dimension to the building, so that was discussed.
Well, I take Aaron's point, though, that it is a long run of 100 feet by roughly half that. And something in the middle, small lobby or entrance or something would break it up a little bit, but
And you will have a little bit of bump out with the fence there, and if we do some things along the doorways, you know, you will start to bring some dimension to
Yeah, not enough.
So can you look at putting a bump out in there and come back with a rendering?
Yes, I can look at doing something. Obviously, that all depends on cost, though, and impact to the budget. So, we don't want to, obviously, we're representing Camden here, so we'll do our best to keep within the confines of their budget. It may not be the full extrusion now because, again, like you talked about, the building is a assembly, essentially. So, pulling out a 10-foot bump there may not exactly, again, we'll have to look at it from a budget standpoint.
Would a small cupola up there do anything for you?
I don't know what that
Have to
is.
be a huge cupola.
Yeah, cupola, okay, cupola, yeah.
Or two.
Or two, yeah.
Or two, yeah.
So I guess just to finish my comments, since I jumped in, I think rooftop mechanical equipment is the wrong way to go.
So do I.
And the design review board mentioned color and material boards, so we can begin to understand what the materials are. That would be helpful as well.
Okay.
Is the future parking gonna be a gravel area or grass or?
Just grass.
Oh, good, okay,
Just grass for the interim.
thanks.
So I had a question on the special permit for the parking. You mentioned parking in the front of the building, in the front yard? What?
Right, so we've been told that the one loading spot that's in the front of the building would be considered parking in the front yard, because there may be a vehicle parked there at one point, and certainly when they're loading and unloading, so that's why we're seeking that.
Okay.
Really?
So I guess speaking of that too, we've pushed to ask them to review alternate locations for the loading dock, and the continued
Yeah.
response is there is no other alternate location. I think the intent of the no front yard parking is to avoid a parking lot.
Right.
So I might contradict myself on the loading dock conversation by saying maybe a loading dock doesn't count as front yard parking. But they have made some effort to try and screen this loading dock. It is not a preferred location by any means, but it doesn't seem like one they're going to give on. So, personally, I think I would rather stand behind the volumetric changes, which would further screen the loading dock, than push moving the loading dock.
Yeah, yeah, and I find it strange too that loading dock would be considered a parking spot, but,
Well, it's, we talked about interpretation of the zoning bylaw earlier this evening, and this is another
yes, we did.
piece of the zoning bylaw whereby it gets down into the interpretation of it. So the driveway and access aisles to get to the parking are permissible in the front yard, obviously, because you gotta get there from here. But the fact that that commercial vehicle, might be parked temporarily in the loading dock area, which is in front of the building.
Yep, I understand.
Check that box, so.
Yeah.
How many square feet is the building?
20,000.
20,000.
Okay, let's see, you also wanted to talk about waivers?
Right, we had a new list of waivers that were added to the plan.
Page 2 of what Betsy gave us.
Page 2 of what Betsy gave us, all right.
I think it was on the beta report.
On the beta,
The
okay.
beta report, page 2, the bottom,
Page
They're
2.
also on the cover of the plan set too.
it's on there too.
Here we go, yep.
So section 419.72 is drain line material, which is the request to not use concrete pipe and use plastic pipe, so HDPE.
Yeah,
throughout
we
the
would
site.
probably take a recommendation from Beta on that,
I don't have any issue with any of these.
okay?
The second one is section 419.75, rain garden berm, which is to extend the berm, have the berm around the rain gardens be 15 feet wide. The third is section 419.75, rain garden security measures, or in your bylaw, I believe it's called drainage basin, would be to put a fence around the entire top of it for security purposes. We don't really feel it's necessary here.
What's the depth of the rain garden?
The depth of the deepest one will get to 4 feet, but it'll drain within 3 hours.
So,
You know-
so the actual physical, depth is maybe a foot or 18 inches? The rest of it's all soil?
Physical
fill depth right.
Right, so you're not gonna, it's gonna
Alright.
look like a little indentation, and nobody's gonna fall in it. The rain garden is meant to infiltrate the water and store the water in the planting mix, which is 3 feet-ish deep. And the water, you know, I don't even think it comes up above the surface.
Yep.
Right, barely. I was thinking if there's one side that's like 148, 150, and the bottom's 143 something, but the water's never gonna get up that high.
Okay, keep going. Elimination of tree easement to screen, can you put the, Betsy, can you put the site back up there for us to take a peek?
Did you want the,
You're talking about both rain gardens or the one in the back?
the planting plan, so both planting plans, so essentially the bylaw looks like it calls for a 10-foot area of trees also around the sides of these basins, which we're asking for a waiver from. So essentially they're screened from view. One is well behind the building, hundreds of feet to the back of the site. And the one in the front, we're looking to provide some screening on the side that you may catch a glimpse of it kind of as you pass between the two Camger buildings.
Well, fair enough.
So a rain garden has plants in it?
In it too.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
Screening a planted area,
Yeah.
to me, doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
But do you not have I can't see through Peter, do you not have plants along the right side of that there, on the front one? Is that what I'm looking at?
This we do here,
Yeah,
right, to help basically screen it from this area.
Yeah.
But essentially, the basin itself will be filled with individual plants.
yeah,
And then the road is way out here,
Can't see it anyway.
and this is all Camger here, and then we're back towards the
Understood.
wetlands.
You're gonna be so distracted by that 100-foot, 50-foot tall facade.
Oh,
People
The
be
trees are
driving
gonna
into
look
the
like
building.
mall.
I got it, all right. Okay, understood that.
The next one is curbing, 74327. So
Cape
we're
Cod berm instead of slope granite, okay?
right. So we're using slope granite out front, just not for the entire expanse of the site. So what we're looking to do is essentially everything in this area is sloped granite, and everything to the back is berm.
Okay.
So we're just looking for the ability to be able to transition it to that
Slope
material.
granite on the street, is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay.
And on the loop around the front too.
Yeah.
Basically
And
until you
tran-
reach
yeah.
the building.
yeah, then transition it.
We all right with that on the street?
We won't be paving it. By street, you mean, I'm assuming it's the turnaround.
Yeah, the radius is coming in off the street or granite, I think you said, right?
Essentially this whole area is
Yeah.
sloped granite.
I'm
And
talking
then-
about the street
What
frontage.
hits the street?
You're not talking about along the street frontage, are you?
No, no,
No,
no,
no, no, no.
on their
Just
property.
A radius is from the street, and then in the
All right,
property,
okay,
and then the
understand.
rest is
Okay,
berm.
yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Do we wanna suggest the radiuses be Cape Cod berm?
But we're not maintaining
We're not
them.
maintaining it, so they can,
But the plow's gonna
They're
go right by them.
yeah,
on the edge, you're saying.
Yeah.
On the edges, so we'll transition down to the road, but typically towns and cities, as they upgrade roads, want to see granite out to the road.
But we're not typical around here.
Okay.
Yeah,
If
so
you don't want it, we don't need
Yeah,
to
so
do
in
it.
this case, the preferred is a nice monolithic berm, it's kind of, you know,
Okay, I mean, we can switch the whole thing to monolithic too. I don't
Yeah.
think that do you have any issues with that? Okay,
it's probably a cost savings as well.
it is a cost, it is a cost.
And a
savings,
maintenance
that's-
savings.
help with your volumetric
There you
change.
go. Put that towards the building, okay.
Okay, the last one on sidewalk, had you been here earlier in the evening, you would have heard us talk about our policy on on sidewalks. If we were to waive the requirement for a sidewalk along your frontage, which is probably reasonable considering that there's no sidewalk along that street, we would ask you to make a contribution to the Norfolk Sidewalk Fund, which we use to improve sidewalks throughout the town in various places. We haven't settled on a figure yet, so many dollars per foot of frontage. So we can't give you that guidance right now, but we will land on that probably within a month or so.
Do you have any issues contributing?
Okay. All right. So we've talked about, in the terms of the beta letter, I counted 31 open issues. I may have missed one or two, but there's a bunch of them. So they need to be closed, and you've said you're working on it, so we'll count on that. Once we get a thumbs up from Phil, then we feel comfortable that those issues are behind us.
Right, so we can work with, if the board is okay, we'll continue to work with Phil directly to get some of those handled. We would like some of them to certainly be conditions of approval at a later time for work to be done later, rather than prior to an approval. But we can certainly work offline with Rich and Phil between now and the next meeting.
Anything else, Rich, that you'd like to add?
No, I think we did speak prior to the meeting on, I think everything's been captured thus far, so.
Phil, anything else you want to add?
No.
Okay. The board, members, anything else?
No.
All right.
I just think we need to formally request a follow-up with the DRB. Not necessarily a meeting, but at least deliver the materials that were requested.
Indeed. I think we should expect that they would respond to the design review board letter.
Including what you requested tonight, or was that in the letter as well?
That wasn't in the letter, so that's this meeting. Two responses.
Well, so, yeah, the materials, you want to actually see
Respond to
materials.
the DRB, and then respond to the board.
Yeah, we have the web panel, I have it in my car, you won't see it right now.
No, we don't.
That's what the DRB
We can
want,
take that
though.
to the design review board.
Yep.
Okay, anything else from the audience before we move on to the next topic? All right, well, thank you very much for your,
Oh, we
Gotta
gotta continue.
continue.
yes,
We're at 7:30, Betsy?
motion to continue the public hearing
7:30.
until, for Camger, until April 14th at 7:30 PM.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. See you next month.
I didn't really.
Chair's going to be absent for about a minute.
Figured it, yeah. Yeah, see? Yeah, you're out at,
I think we could have ordered these a little bit better. 6 Hill Street should have always go last or something.
Yeah. I agree.
What a draining. I don't know. How long ago was 6 Hill Street purchased?
it was
Year and a half?
Year and a half, oh, okay. Wow.
Hey, for perspective,
November,
you take 25 of those Camger buildings, that would be your 500,000 square foot warehouse.
With one big flat surface right across the front
Wish I
of
could
it.
get a barn facade on it.
Tell them we want some ins and outs.
Look what's on my
Right of
screen.
that.
Yeah, I'm ready.
I saw that.
So we get the.
It looks
500,000
fine to me.
warehouse,
Great.
And we'll
Good
we'll put a cupola on it.
One,
One,
right in the middle.
that's plenty, yeah.
Is there any update from Bristol Pond? What do we have for Bristol Pond statements?
Yes, I have, as a matter of fact.
This stuff doesn't work, right? But I'm still
You're better off washing hands.
Is the back of the property a road? There? Is that-
Yeah, it's actually the front of the property.
Oh, that's,
Yeah, I keep doing that too. This is 1A.
oh, it is, okay. I thought this was an access road down here, but
No.
that's nothing.
It's just a,
So why would this be on the front?
this is like an old railroad track.
I thought they were gonna move this to the back and put housing near the front, or on the other side. Oh,
This is
you just dropped
my
a square.
artistic representation.
Got it. Well, when I saw it back there, I'm thinking, well, it must be another road somewhere. That's at the back of the property.
I think the things that are interesting about this is all wetland, right?
Oh, is it really?
This is gonna be their warehouse and storage and shit, right? So all they have left is this.
To try to solve the 40B thing?
Yeah, which means it's a 6-story tall apartment building.
Yeah, I think by the time they get to solving it, it may not be as big as a problem as it is right now. There's just so many things in the pipeline.
Walter.
Maybe at the end.
yeah. Yeah, he asked for,
Like I told you.
yeah. Yeah, take that up first? Sure.
Walter's doing a great job.
That letter you wrote.
I have to go home and
about,
pack
the
tonight.
lots,
Yeah.
will you run that
Florida
by
for
me?
work.
Describe what you've done and how the research you've done.
Joe for work, huh?
Yeah.
Just to make sure that we get that, another pair of eyes looking at that.
Yeah, I know a lot of
Alright.
companies
Because I know
are
we're
not.
gonna have to, especially you, God bless you, are gonna have to deal with Big Al.
I did see the, yeah, I reread town council's letter, and I mean, I think what we've done is what she has suggested, so.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, I can run it by.
Yeah, just,
Well, I'll run by the issue of, to end up now creating a nonconformity from a lot size standpoint.
but it's grandfathered, right?
That was the debatable point. That was the issue.
I understand, but I mean, I believe it's granted, it goes back to 1954, so, okay.
Right, but that's the point of contention.
All right, we can round up the herd here and, John, can we get going?
Uh-oh. Done going a bit. Comfort break done?
Okay, we're on to the next item, which is Oak Hill Realty, Stony Ridge Estates, Beaverbrook Lane, Blueberry Lane, Stony Road, bond issue. Rich, you want to take us through that?
Yeah, I will. The only thing is, the folks that are in the audience are here for 75 Cleveland Street, which is the potential purchasers of 75
I'd like
Cleveland.
to go out of order, huh?
So I'd like to.
Sure,
You don't
why not?
mind.
Let's do that. All right, so we're going to talk about 75 Cleveland Street. The folks have a lot there, which, as I understand it, they like to put a couple of houses on, but the town has first right of refusal.
Right. I thought.
So why don't you
Just go to the.
grab a microphone and talk to us?
Yeah, and we'll pull up the town GIS just to kind of give you
Yep.
spatially an idea of
Sure.
where we're talking about and,
Yeah. Drove by it on the way here.
right, but just to,
Do we have recommendations from other boards?
Yeah, we do, one.
you do, yep,
Okay.
yep.
Basically, we saw this land, my wife, my name is John Nolan, this is my wife Nancy, and we're proposing to come into town.
And you live at
I live in Norwood,
Norwood, okay.
so it's the
Yep.
next best town. But we're looking at this property because my daughter, we just became grandparents, and my wife has been looking around for some property that maybe we can just have my daughter build on, make a little compound, kind of our
Sure.
house and hers.
Sure.
So we found this property, and we were negotiating with the realtor, and at the same time, we were trying to come up with a plan of how we would split it up in just the two lots. Basically, I think pretty much we're gonna keep 15 acres, and my daughter will have 5 acres. And I'm not gonna, I mean, the right-hand side of the property is wetlands, so, I mean, it's just the two houses. We'd never develop anything else.
Well, we understand from the town's review of that, it's probably only buildable for 2 lots anyway, right?
Maybe, it might be true, right. As a right.
Yeah.
There's an existing house that was built in 1804, I think, on the property.
Sits
and
out front there, right on the
it's out
road.
front.
Yeah.
And it's a nice old house, but we can't, to do what we want to do with my daughter involved, we can't leave the house. So it has to either be moved or dismantled.
Right.
And that's, basically it.
Okay, Rich, you want to take us through the land here and tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, sure.
Yes. Well, CB, what is it, what's the,
Community preservation.
yeah, CPC.
CPC.
Has said they don't want it.
They passed on it, yes.
Passed on it.
Because it was only, It's a maximum of 2. Bob Bullock had looked at it.
Right.
He walked it, he said maximum
Oh,
of
I
2.
know, it's all wet back there.
Yeah.
Plus there's restricted wetlands, which you can't even do anything on.
Yeah.
Donald will keep me in check, make sure I got everything right. But town property that was acquired from the Greaves, as Weavers, Greaves, yeah. Sorry, different road of town. Another piece of open space, my apologies, but Weaver, as well as this piece here
Right.
that abuts Chickatobit. One interesting point of note, which I know Donna knows very well, is we actually don't have access to this piece off of Chickatobit. It's held, this little right-of-way is still held by a private property owner, which at some point wouldn't be a bad idea to consider approaching them to purchase it, because it would gain access for people to be able to walk through there.
But, yeah, why doesn't CPC do that?
It's probably something they just need to kind of put on their to-do list to kind of move it forward, approach that property owner, but
Yeah.
it certainly makes sense. And then we have,
Why don't we make it our recommendation
Yeah,
to them to
let's-
do that?
Right.
all right, you can, sure, yeah. And then we have,
We can't tell them to do it.
we have Fern Ridge,
Yep.
which I think,
No, don't go there, don't go there.
well, it's important of the context of the area, I guess I would say, right? So hopefully at some point, which Fern Ridge is over here, which was an open space subdivision. So this piece of property here is supposed to be open space to the town, as well as this piece, which then connects, so it'll all be contiguously connected. This piece here actually abuts the Winston Road, the cul-de-sac, which then you would have access through it. The one caveat, as well as the board knows, maybe the general public doesn't, is it's in litigation, and one of the pieces is to try to acquire that property, which was supposed to be given to the town. We will get to that point at some point, and then we'll have access through here as well. So that's kind of the framework of some of the surrounding open space in the area. This particular piece is, there's been several people have expressed interest in developing it. Nothing of large scale, though, between 2 and 3 lots. And the challenge for the present family that are interested in trying to do is they want to, unless you change your plan, but to reside in the house, build the house out back, then tear down the house, and then build their daughter's house out front. So we have discussed, in order to be able to do that, it's a little bit, some nuance to it because of the wetlands that are adjacent to it.
Rich, is the Weaver property open space accessible from the Fern Ridge open space?
It is.
Okay.
Once we
Yeah.
acquire it, yes.
Yeah.
Once we acquire it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like-
But it sure would be nice to be able, I would think, to be able to go all the way out. So that piece would really be a great recommendation.
Well, right now on the plan, it is ours for access, unless he.
Yeah, it is, but the thing is, you can't technically get out this, you can go in and walk around and come back out the same way. You just can't connect between the two right now, because that is it's privately owned, so. But it's just a small sliver of property. It would seem we can try to track that down. Hopefully the CPC would go along with that recommendation. But, so that's kind of the general.
Yep. And CPC has passed, right? They've said.
CPC passed, but it's being asked for them to give reconsideration, I guess I would call it, so to speak. And
From who? From whom? Who's
Historic?
asking? Pardon me?
From the Historic Commission,
Historic Commission is asking
Yes.
them to reconsider.
Why,
Okay.
do they want the house?
I believe they actually emailed, did they not email Betsy did Betsy Pine?
I don't think she emailed, but I was watching the Board of Selectmen.
Oh, maybe that's what it was.
There's been some
Can I-
development since then.
Betsy Pine has, I'm Nancy Nolan. Betsy Pine has been in correspondence with me,
today she told me, actually it was an email from yesterday, that she did all her investigating over the weekend. She realizes that it's not feasible for the town to do it, and she has sent an email to the town administrator saying that she withdraws her tabling the vote. So I could send you a copy of that email. Okay.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, just to kind of probably close it out.
Are you, have you closed on this property? Do you have a P&S?
No, so just, actually, probably just for general insight, knowledge, so forth. So this property is under Chapter 61B, which is forestry. So when somebody puts property in 61A, B, A, B, and just 61, it would be
61.
recreation,
I thought it was
right? It's, essentially, you get a tax break because you're essentially preserving the land in
Yeah.
somewhat of its
Yeah.
natural state. So then when somebody comes forward, you do have to annually keep the land in the program, though, with the assessors, because it could fall out.
Yeah.
This land is in the program, so essentially what that means is when a offer to purchase land is submitted to the owner, it goes to the town under the right of first refusal. The town has up to 120 days to make a decision whether they want to try to buy the property for.
Where are we in that 120 days?
We're about 30, 40 days in, so.
Okay, all right.
Now, I think, things are kind of evolving as I'm hearing them, but generally speaking, you try to work much quicker than, within the 120
Okay.
days.
So it sounds like they're all set with Betsy not wanting the house.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
So,
I think, yeah, well, that
let them get started.
changes the,
Yeah.
unless the board, unless you have otherwise, I think there's, again, so we kind of talked about a few different options. So basically, if you go, are you thinking, well, we have to get to this, but it could be under a state lot, right? Are we still? No, you're going to just do the 2 Form A lots? Okay. All right.
But just to let you know, we did offer Betsy that once we've built our house, if she wants, we will donate the house to the Historical Commission if they want to move it somewhere.
Yeah.
So we have made that offer.
Sure, okay, right.
Okay.
Okay, good, thank you. Any other comments? We know, sounds where you stand, we know what your proposal is. It seems reasonable to us. If the town passes on this, then we would expect a letter from the town to say that, from one of the.
They'll notify them formally, yeah.
From the town administrator, I presume. And then, next thing we'll see is a plan from you folks as to what you want to do.
Yeah, so to close out the process, if you don't feel it's a, recommendation to try to acquire the property, we could send that along to the select board. That's the.
Okay, I don't think we need a motion on that, we'll just,
No.
Is the CPC the only board or group that would be considering the purchase?
No, it gets sent to Historic Commission, the Open Space Commission, there's
But they have to
different.
vote to bring it forward.
But they're the ones that have the money.
CPC has.
Yeah, they're the ones that
Yeah.
would.
But normally they take that into consideration for
Yeah.
affordable housing, for historic purposes. They take all of that into
Yeah,
consideration.
they weighed in.
Open space as well, but they are, if I'm remembering correctly, they're bound by appraised value. They can't exceed appraised value, and I'm not sure if that's, and I don't actually think they had the property appraised because they walked it with Bob, and from any viewpoint, because they could only put 2 houses on it, they didn't want it for affordable and.
Yeah, they
everything
didn't
else
want it. So that's a good question. I want to look into it a little bit because this is, an offer that's been made on the property without an appraisal. They just made the offer, so I don't know. I got to do
Yeah,
the
so-
homework to find out.
Well, we had the same thing on Gums Farm. It has to pass appraisal, Gary. If these folks are overpaying for it, and we had appraisal that didn't come to the numbers, we
That's
can't
why.
pay more.
Yeah.
Right.
That could be a reason that you don't acquire.
Well, that's the right of first refusal too.
But, and typically the first step is CPC would ask for an appraisal if they could see enough value for the town. And I'm not recalling that they wanted to move forward with the appraisal after they walked it with Bob, and I
Okay.
wasn't involved at that particular
Okay.
time.
All right.
So they couldn't extract enough value from it compared to what the sale price was. So they didn't pay for the appraisal. The appraisal could come back and be higher than the value that they've offered, in which case they could put. But
They could buy
if
it,
it fell
yeah.
short, they just can't buy
Yeah,
it.
you can't buy it. Yeah.
And that's why I was asking if they are the only group that would be interested in buying it.
Well, I know the town, I think the select board maybe discussed, I can't recall exactly, but the only entity that would have,
Select Board, I think, is gonna wait until they get a recommendation from this group.
yeah, where I was going is the only
Yeah, we don't have,
viable, practical, let's say this, is the CPC. The town's not gonna, while it's important, it's great, open space and so forth, there's a lot of competing needs, so if it wasn't the CPC that was gonna fund it, the town wasn't gonna fund it elsewhere with other funds.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah, I think
So,
that's.
yeah, we could, if you would be so kind as to
Yeah.
put a letter together to the, to the Board of Selectmen, Select Board, excuse me.
Soon we notify them, so these folks can get started building.
Yeah, so that we recommend that the town pass on this.
Okay.
Thank you for attending.
Good luck, guys, welcome to
Yep,
Norfolk.
and hope to see your plans in front of us shortly.
I hope to, too. Thank
Actually,
Why would, they have
Do
to
they need-
submit because they have to subdivide.
yeah.
Yeah, it's
I
just
think
an,
so,
it's
yeah.
an A&R though,
Yeah,
so
It's an A&R.
Another one of those A&R
No issue with frontage?
it's an A&R. It could, well, I mean, you never know until you see the plan, but from what I can glean, I don't think there should be any issue.
As long as it's not dated 1954, we're all right.
It's,
Seems to be a bad year.
it's a qualified lot, I mean, qualified street, and so anyway, it should be okay. But
Okay, back to the
the devil's in the
agenda,
detail.
agenda.
Okay, green agenda, to the top, Oak Hill Realty.
Yeah,
Essentially what I'm asking, we're asking, we, I guess, but myself and the treasurer, is just to accept money back that was released by the bank to the developer. We're holding, granted, we're not holding a lot of money. It was $2,761 for Beaverbrook Lane, Blueberry Lane, Stony Road. I think there's acknowledgement on the developer, more so, well, the bank should have contacted the town of Norfolk before they released the money to the developer, which didn't happen in this case. So the treasurer's office has been in contact with the bank, and this developer understands that the bank shouldn't have done that, and they've agreed to write a check back to the town of Norfolk in the amount of $2,761. Now, it isn't a lot of money, I understand that, but it may help towards getting the road accepted, and there might be work, legal-wise, deed research, et cetera, that we might need, so there is maybe.
All we need to do is vote to accept the funds, right?
Yeah.
yeah,
It took
all
a
right.
lot for that, huh?
So, need a motion to accept the funds of 2,761.
Yeah.
So moved.
Yeah.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right.
All right, okay, meeting minutes. We have a set of meeting minutes, and I presume that you have looked at them all?
I have, and I provided Betsy with a few changes. I think other people did as well.
Okay.
So I will make a motion to accept the meetings, to approve the meeting minutes from February 11th, and accept those minutes.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Abstain. I wasn't present.
Yeah, okay, all right. Town planner updates. Sir? No,
So the,
no checking the Bruins score, just,
no, I was actually looking at Gary's. Sorry. Yes, so I did write a letter to the planning board relative to the potential zoning changes for Springtown meeting. You should have it. Maybe you didn't bring a copy of it.
it's in the package.
All right,
It's in the package.
okay.
Oh, I didn't read it.
Didn't read it,
I
okay.
don't have it, do I?
Sure, they should have, but.
Should've got it.
Just to summarize the letter, essentially, there is, as we talked about at the previous plan board meeting, there is an interested company, Lincoln Properties, that is interested in the Southwood property.
Don't have it.
They
Yeah,
would
Still in there, I think so, huh?
like to
You think
develop
so, huh?
the property for warehouse distribution as well as
That's it right there.
40B.
Friendly
40B, friendly 40B. There's been, the property's been abandoned since 2003. There's been multiple, over the years, interested parties to develop the property. But combination of zoning, but also more importantly, the site itself. The hospital, you have to demo the hospital. There is asbestos in there, so there's costs associated with that. There is an oil spill, fuel oil spill that's underneath the building, which, to get the full extent of it and the costs associated with that, hasn't been completely nailed down. And then as well as the landfill that's on the property from the hospital there, the extent. So there's, through the mass contingency plan, there is some assessment work that's been done on the property, but essentially the complete assessment and the remediation plan is part of the puzzle that needs to happen for that property ultimately. So it's kind of a little bit of a moving target what those costs would be to clean up the property, and then what reuse would be there would also play a part into the extent of the contamination. So the more recent company that came forward, like I said, Lincoln Properties, would like to do warehouse distribution, a friendly 40B. There was a previous company to them that came before the town from St. Louis that wanted to do the same makeup as far as development proposal. But there's two things. One is that there is a deed restriction on there for hospital use, which would have to be voted on by town meeting, submitted to the legislature, and then that deed restriction would have to be removed. I think most people understand, or at least that town meeting article, vote, legislature remove it, process-wise, is not that challenging, but the devil's in the detail. So, which means, a good project that the townspeople would feel comfortable to vote, to then send a release on to the state, would need to be part of the mix. So, having said that, this particular developer, and I think it probably would matter who it may be, is interested in pursuing a developer's agreement to try to hash out some of the concerns and issues as going forward would need to be. One would be the zoning doesn't fit right now for what they want to do. And the zoning doesn't even fit for some of the other proposals that those require zoning changes as well that were proposed in the past. So there is a zoning piece probably in this, no matter who that person or persons might be, to redevelop the site. And the Archdiocese has, from what I understand, I don't know the numbers, but they have, changed the pricing of it, which means, I suspect means it's a little bit less than it was before. But the harder part from the developer standpoint is that they want someone to do their due diligence and then purchase the property within 60, 90 days. And under those timeframes, you're not going to be able to permit anything. I mean, it's infeasible. So there is a significant risk from a developer's standpoint, no matter who that developer would be, that you have to permit something, just whatever that may be, through the town, whether it's a 40B or not a 40B, whether, so forth. So what we'd like to do is it was placehold by putting it there at the February meeting, and I know there was concern about the expediency of it, non-expediency of it. At least it was, for lack of, at least a step to say the town is being somewhat trying to be responsive to development and try to, the details need to shake out. I understand that. I think most people understand that. But, how you become workable when it comes to developments, how you act and what you do and the actions you take. So those things all kind of do matter a little bit. It, it, it may not make it to town meeting in May, but at least it was a first step to at least say we're open to the idea. And those little messages over time hopefully can end up to say that, yeah, the town is open to business, because quite honestly, you probably, well, you heard it this evening earlier, you know, there was, you know, a criticism of, hey, we're gonna do this X, Y, Z for a sidewalk fund, that's not business friendly. So those characterizations and opinions are always out there. So some of these actions could hopefully move us in a different direction. What I need, and I did meet with Mass Development last week, and there are funds that the town could apply to do more assessment of the property from an environmental cleanup standpoint, to try to quantify things a little bit more. So the developer, when I spoke to him on the phone, was interested in that, because it's a risk for them too. So if there's a way to better quantify the cleanup costs, and they don't have to spend their dime to do that, that is attractive to them. The piece of this puzzle is that the Archdiocese really needs to hopefully work with all parties as a player to try to move things along, understand that that is a challenge site. It's not an easy piece of property to develop.
Well, they should figure that out by now.
And sometimes that takes time. When you know, sometimes you don't see something right in front of your face, realize what it is, and hopefully they understand that, and they'll work with us with, it's this developer or another developer, to try to vet out some of these issues.
Why do we have to change zoning before we have the developers agreement?
We don't.
We don't.
We don't. We
I
should.
think the zoning that, well,
You missed when you went to probably the restroom, but you missed my speech.
I'm sorry, I
Okay.
apologize.
All right? Very boring. Go ahead, I'll let you go, and then I'll
If I'm repeating
recap.
what you said, just stop me and I'll shut up.
No, that's all right.
But warehouses today are not the warehouses from 10 years ago. Warehouses today are distribution centers, they're fulfillment centers. They deliver to retail customers. And right now, Milford's way of life is being destroyed because they have this warehouses now are called dock houses. They have no windows. The end intent is to have them stock orders by robots and have it all done robotically, and they're 24-hour businesses. In Milford right now, when they approve their plan, I mean, it's not like the old days. You're bringing in, manufacturers are bringing in wholesale goods and then distributing them to end users. These are actually wholesalers delivering end user goods here, and they're all distributed to end users. So it's basically retail sales. And incidentally, in our definition of warehouse, it does not allow retail sales, so that definition there would stop them from doing a distribution center. That's why, from a cost accounting perspective, you would never spend $8 million on a piece of land to put up a metal prefab building just to store goods, to distribute them out to wholesalers. So if we approve this, and this is why the guy's so confident he's gonna get a warehouse there, if we get this, this is a distribution center. And what they did in Milford is they have their 300 vans parked there at that spot, and then they went and bought other satellite spots to keep other vans in those spots. So they have hundreds and hundreds from different locations all fulfilling these orders. And when the town of Milford complained about the van activity, I mean, you don't fight Amazon anyway. These vans, it'd be nice if we got the excise taxes on the vans, and et cetera, and the tax revenue is good, but the vans are all subcontracted out, and they're all registered in different spots, and they all conglomerate there, so there's nothing from stopping this location to rent out 10 acres from Bob Kraft as a parking lot of his 100 acres up there, and having it just as van storage, and have it come in here. So I think when we're talking about a warehouse, you're talking about an traffic issue, redistribution center, because the warehouses from before, I don't think they're much around anymore. It's funny, Plainville, and Peter sent me the article, they voted to rezone, I don't know particulars, for one of these distribution centers also, and they lucked out. They got a biomedical corporate headquarters there, which they're bringing in hundreds of high-paying jobs, and it's a whole different atmosphere, so they really lucked out. That's what we talked about at Southwood years ago, if they could luck out and get a biomedical center, because they're coming out, because Cambridge is pretty much all saturated with
Full
them.
up,
So-
yeah.
So they're coming around with the highway access here, so my only point was if this is gonna be zoned for warehouse, it's not gonna be like, well, the tractor trailers come in, unload, they sit, and then they bring them to wholesalers. This is gonna be a very active area, that's all.
John's point to me offline also was that a way to protect the town from his perspective was to create an overlay zone for this area, much as we had proposed to do some years back when George Malone was proposing his initial development of the Southwood property. Rich has countered that in his note to us here and says that we don't really need to do that. We can use a developer agreement to pin down the guy.
But
The guy, let me finish. The guy, however, has, to John's second point here tonight, the guy has said he's building this on spec, so at the moment, we have no idea what the heck is going in there, whether it's Walmart or Amazon or John Smith Company, we just don't know. He doesn't know.
Right.
What he does, he's trusting, though, what he said to us is the market is such, that there's great demand for warehouse space, and if he builds it on spec, he's gonna fill it up.
Yeah.
He knows that, and that's probably true, or he wouldn't roll the dice and put his money in it.
So,
I was in that first meeting with the Lincoln Properties with Walter, and during that meeting, the guy was talking about warehouse, forthright, and we had asked him about the apartments for the 40B requirements to be satisfied. And I asked him just to do some schematics and just sketch out on the land where the warehouse might be, where the apartments might be, a very, inexpensive type of engineering to just bring forward, so if we went to the town, we'd be able to show them what's going where, and of course, the warehouse doesn't need the same wastewater that the apartments do, so just give us an idea what's going on the site, then at least you're bringing something to the town. You also could extrapolate from that the potential tax revenue. If he says he's building a warehouse this big and this many units, we could get an idea of what the tax revenue from that would be. But I don't think you've got anything like that,
No,
right?
well, we got, he just said 500 to 600,000 square feet of warehouse, that's all he said.
there is a,
And Rich provided this, by the way, you've all seen this afternoon on the email. This is an overlay of,
that was Aaron.
Aaron, yeah.
oh, Aaron
Aaron
did
said
this?
that.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
Yep.
thank you, Aaron. I thought it was Rich. Anyway, there's a 600,000 square foot rectangle imposed on the land. It could be moved around a little bit one way or the other, but that's the order of magnitude of what you're looking at there. Pass it over if you haven't
So what
seen
do-
it.
Wetlands on the left side there, right? How many acres of that 84
Yeah,
acres is
yeah.
wetlands?
There's 87 acres in total. I forget how many.
Yeah.
It's a good chunk down the bottom, the southern part of it
Yeah.
there.
So before you stepped out, what I was saying was that when I met with Mass Development last week, is that there's money available that the town could apply to Mass Development for with the consent of the property owner, which is the Archdiocese, to do further evaluation on the environmental side. There's also money available that we could apply to them as well, is to take a look at this site and do an analysis on the constraints that are there, infrastructure, location, market, et cetera, and kind of work through what the townspeople would like to see there, and whether that really actually and truly can be achieved from the location. So there are services that we could apply for their help on that. But what it would require, before you left, is that the Archdiocese needs to be a partner in that, to let us do that. So we can apply for technical assistance to help us answer some of these questions, provided they're willing to work with us. And I think, having talked to the developer, I think the developer really seems to indicate that the Archdiocese needs to work with the town as well. That the time frame and the terms that they're looking for now are challenging for them, because they want them to buy it and close on it within 60 to 90 days, and you can't get anything done in 60 to 90 days.
It's really hard to do testing before you know what's going where. If the warehouse is going on one side, then the whole wastewater and stormwater is radically different, and the wetland becomes less of an issue. If you've got apartments over here, or also you could strategize this, so the parking area is gonna be where the hazardous waste, the medical dump is, so rather than removing that, you can cap that, and that could be their parking area. So you wouldn't want, I'm sure they would want to go doing stormwater or wastewater testing in an area that they plan to have the warehouse. So if we at least had a sketch, again, a schematic of what buildings they were going to put where in the activity, then we could release the money and let them do the testing.
So the testing I'm talking about is environmental for the contamination side of things first, but go ahead.
Doesn't the diocese require complete site cleanup as part of the sale? You can't cap off stuff and leave it in the
They
ground.
did before.
So
Did that change?
So the terms of the, from what I understand the terms are, they want to have somebody do their due diligence and then close within 60, 90 days and buy the property, and then they're done. So
Without a guarantee of cleaning up the site?
No.
Let me
The
jump in real
clean.
quick, 'cause we spent 3 years talking about this. Right, 3 years working on a developer's agreement, not 30 to 90 days. 3 years we spent talking about a developer's agreement.
Must be a
And
hell of
at
an
the end, the
agreement.
developer walked away, right? So,
Well, we walked away.
well.
But
After
it
3 years.
It ended.
So, I'm oversimplifying a very long, complicated conversation, but if this conversation is coming back up, it's worth reading the developer agreement where it was left. I'll say that, maybe we can circulate it. The second thing is, I think there were 2 main points. Either the developer needs to take the risk, sign the agreement, and assume they can proceed with the town, or the town needs to take the risk and work on the zoning overlay district and rezone the property prior to the sale of the property. Right? So that's essentially where we ended up. And there's multiple variations of either of those scenarios.
The 2 benefits on this one, Aaron, this is gonna be only maybe 2 components, which is gonna be a big warehouse or most of it, and buildings, where the other guy had multiple uses. And the other big thing was, the other guy was basically a real estate broker that was gonna get the zoning change and then sell it to different components. Where these people here buying it are gonna go right through and finish that out. So I think that, in that regard, the agreement should be less involved than before, but they are tough.
Do you know the end user or who is it? It's not Amazon. Do you know, it isn't the developer either. They're building it for somebody.
No, so Lincoln Properties has developed warehouse distribution centers. They permitted one in Bellingham. I want to say it's, give or take, I think they 300,000 square feet. And there is a market for, not just Amazon, there's other markets for it. And they build it on spec.
They build it on spec.
They build it on spec, and then by that time, usually somebody comes along. So what he said is, he's not marketing it to Amazon, but he's not saying it couldn't be Amazon. So he doesn't know. So he's being upfront to say, now, there are some, just to clarify a few points between Milford situation with Amazon and this particular site. Number one, Amazon bought a facility that has 0 parking for the vans on it. They are parking, as you mentioned, vans off-site that were not permitted through the town. So there's an internal issue with there, when I spoke to some town officials, that there are satellite locations where the vans are being kept, and then they're shuttling to the distribution center and going out from there, which is a big problem for there. And the town of itself, there's
let's cut to the chase on this, right? If we start restricting the use of the warehouse, then the developer's gonna walk. Right?
Yeah, but I was trying to understand the problem.
Right, but
Yeah.
So
But again, if you start.
You're saying it can be an Amazon, it can be anything.
It might be an
Yes,
Amazon, it
that's
might
right.
be
Okay.
any number of people, but if we start restricting the potential uses of the warehouse, then the warehouse devalues.
All
So
the
either-
fulfillment centers
Either
are
you
saying-
you accept the warehouse and what comes with it, or you don't.
I don't think that was the case with like the Plainville one. I mean,
Do you know if that's the case?
The Plainville one?
No. Do you know if they'll accept any restrictions as a warehouse?
Well, I think,
That's
so
why I
the
think
first thing is I mean, as much as you can within limits, but you need to provide you have to operate on the site. This is a ground-up site, so you need to have the ability to have vehicles there on site to be stored if they're gonna be used as part of the operation. You can't,
Absolutely. I
you
mean,
can't permit a distribution center that doesn't have the ability on site to make sure the vehicles are there.
And if you look at the plot, there's plenty of room for parking of
You know.
vehicles here, plenty of room.
That's not to say that they might do some of those things or try to lease satellite sites, but from the start, you gotta have it. But those are some of the things
The
that,
issue before us tonight on this topic is a vote to recommend to the Board of Select Board, excuse me, I keep using the wrong phrase, Select Board, to pull back the zoning changes that we had proposed for warehouse and the other changes that are associated with that, and not go forward with them in the May meeting.
not well, they're on the warrant. You have to schedule a hearing for it, so, I think there's some, between right now and some detail that I need to kind of close some gaps out, which would be, one, is the Archdiocese willing to work with the town on the timeframes that the town would want to have and the developer?
I mean,
So,
we have one.
you have time, there's time to
one
pull
more
it if you
meeting.
need to.
I understand. We have one more meeting next month prior to the April 21st closing of the printing of the warrant, right?
Correct.
And so we have one more opportunity beyond tonight to say, let's go forward with those, put them in the warrant and get them on the town floor, or pull them back, right?
Right.
Okay, so we don't have to
But
make
as we
that
know
decision.
from recent history, there are other parties involved that might change that trajectory.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, we have a zoning problem with interpretation on a little 1 acre site. I mean, if you throw in a warehouse bylaw for whatever
Yeah,
zone, I mean, oh my God, this is so involved because this is gonna change the way of life of the roads in the town. It's just huge. A development agreement, at least you could forecast the size of the building, number of parking spots he wants, the hours of
Yeah.
operation.
The
We-
traffic.
It's fine,
yeah.
we could do a traffic
So we took
study.
one small step, was to at least say, okay, we put it on the warrant. It could come off, and there's probably good possibility it is. But instead of saying no right away, at least there was a step, or maybe tiny step, but at least there was showing some willingness to town and the townspeople to work with the developer, because you're trying to change the trajectory a little bit here of a willingness to work with developers to have the site redeveloped. So we're not there yet, so I feel like if the Archdiocese isn't really understanding the complexity and the time frame, then that's a different story. That I would say, you know what, maybe it's gotta be pulled off.
Fair enough. I'll pull back my comment.
Just a little bit, yeah.
Pull back my comment and bring it up again at the next meeting, all right?
Yeah.
And we'll talk about it one more time, and then we'll decide, does this board recommend going forward with the the zoning changes that we proposed, or do we recommend pulling it back, all right?
And there was no cap on the building in the bylaw, and no
No,
special permit.
No, there is, so, we probably, it wouldn't be terribly a bad idea just to have a meeting to discuss this.
Well, I mean, you already see the advisory board with no caps on, you see what the problem we have with the B1.
No,
caps
well,
on
the only reason why I'm saying is we put in, there's a few options that were submitted, and you may need to pull back. So, for example, there is no cap and there is a cap.
But you're asking-
In the world of moving forward, right, we mentioned a negative example, which is Milford. We mentioned a positive example, which is Plainville. Can we understand why Plainville was successful? Did they have an overlay district? Were they negotiating with developers? What did Plainville do to put them in a position to have a mutually beneficial warehouse use in their town.
All right, I
I
could,
have it on good authority that it was, they did put restrictions into it, like truck volume, number of trips, routing, et cetera. And that biomedical company took it over from the developer and turned it into that facility that it is today.
Right.
So it was controversial as a warehouse, and it turned into a different project altogether.
Well, you know the Plainville planner, right?
yeah, I do. And the other thing, the difference between Norfolk and Plainville is they already have it's a clean site. It's a business industrial park there that's already in place in that town, so.
But I think to Aaron's point, with a
We
phone
could-
call, you ought to be able to get a copy of what they put down for restrictions, couldn't you?
Sure.
Has this guy made a financial commitment on the land?
No.
So you want to go change the zoning last minute, he hasn't even made a commitment on the land. I mean,
No, I think it's premature, but that's.
well, our last meeting, he was gonna pass on this by the end of November, that's what he said. When we first met with him, he had 90 days to do due diligence, he was gonna have to pass it over later.
Just to clarify, just for the board and the audience at home, the one you're referring to was not Lincoln Properties. It was transfer, they're from St. Louis. So this is another development
So that-
after that one.
So you've had one meeting with them only?
We've had one or two meetings for them, yeah.
Was it the first meeting when I was there?
That's a completely different company.
Different company?
Completely
Okay.
different company, yep.
Okay.
And they were from St. Louis, based company, and I think essentially the sense I got from them is to try to deal with the Massachusetts legislature and get a deed restriction, have no familiarity with trying to get things done was a big concern to them, so they stepped away. Now, Lincoln Properties, who does do business in Massachusetts, yeah, the deed restriction is still something that concerns them to get it done, but they had a better understanding of the process, at least, which was, town meeting vote to the legislature, but the town is involved, so there's a say that the townspeople have to have in what happens with it. The zoning was something to at least say, hey, if I could do what I want to do, at least I know I can allowed to do it, and then I got to permit it. Now, the subsequent conversations with him is he understands the complexity between, the chicken and egg thing, right? Here's the development, try to change the zoning. And what he said is, yeah, I'm willing to work with the town, but I need the archdiocese to work with me so I can work with the town. That's the message we're at right now.
So if the zoning's passed, then he has contacts and gets the.
So he's not, for him, it's not as critical, it's critical that the town is working on the zoning and could be working on the developer's agreement simultaneously,
Oh, great,
okay?
great.
But the archdiocese needs to work with the town on a time frame the town can work on as well, so. Because he's not gonna end Lincoln
Representative Dooley was at the meeting, John, and described how he could get the deed restriction lifted through the legislature, what that process is, once the town has agreed that it's appropriate for him to do so. And that made this fellow feel pretty comfortable and checked that box, and then he moved on to us talking about zoning, would we be willing to work with him? And we said yes, and so we checked that box. And those are the two main concerns he had with us. Now, he probably had a lot of other concerns with
No, but there was a willingness to work with them.
Was the topic of, like, traffic restrictions, things like that, brought up as well at that
No,
discussion
they
with the developer?
They weren't.
No, the worst.
I don't remember them.
Yeah, well, maybe then subsequent to that, so.
Like, would he be expecting that there's gonna be some constraints around operational hours and traffic patterns and?
Yeah, I mean, it's,
I think that's why the development agreement is important, because I think.
so
most
we had
things
talked
happen a
about,
certain way.
what we did discuss in general terms is there might be roadway changes that need to be done to prevent, for example, there might be streets that are used, just in general terms. Let's take Valley Street, for example. Okay? you can easily kind of regulate, if you will, more so a truck from a distribution center than all the people that are in their vehicles cutting through Valley Street on a daily basis. That we said, you may need to change the traffic pattern so that there's physical changes to the roadway system to prevent that kind of traffic, which may not be a direct result of your development, but mitigates an existing problem that's there today because of the road, those are the kind of things that we talked about.
You need state approval for that, right? Change traffic patterns?
Valley Street is a town road, but yeah, we would have
Still
to
need
talk
it.
to MassDOT too. But those are some of the things that we talked about that you'd have to vet through with them and permit it to.
And what about like Walpole and Rentham? Like, because this 2 lane strip that it services just basically goes to Walpole's Town Center and Rentham Town Center. And then you've got the 115 corridor, right, that goes through all of Norfolk.
Yeah, we'd have to figure that out. I guess you got,
I mean, 500,000 square feet equates to like how many bays, how many trucks?
that would be more the detail of.
Well,
the-
it's
yeah.
25 of those Camden buildings.
Yeah, depends what's being stored there. It's, yeah,
Yeah.
those are the level of detail. But I will say that you have that 300,000 square foot,
It's in
which
perspective.
now is a nice biomedical building in Plainville on Route 1A. It's not to say that they're not coming through Norfolk right now, the people go, so we have to be in contact, we kind of balance it off, right? We got space in Walpole that's on Route 1A, the industrial park that's up, that's impacting us. Are you talking about impacting other towns or us specifically?
Well, first and foremost, Norfolk. But,
Right.
But also that Walpole and Rentham will get the spillover effects of it as well, right?
Right, so it's a balancing act.
Yeah.
So no matter what, so right now, so where we start from ground zero, which is, there's nothing on that site now, it's a vacant piece of property. So no build essentially creates no traffic. And then we go off from there, and then we kind of have to get to that point. But he's willing to work with the town on a developer's agreement and work on the zoning change, the question of the archdiocese. So that's kind of summation here, so what I need to do is come back to the board to see that the archdiocese is willing to work with town and developer.
So he'll work on a developer's agreement and change zoning at the same time.
Yeah, he doesn't, that can be done, yes. So that's not.
Is there a point in time when he's out of the deal? We squandered too much time and the ship sailed and,
Again,
Yeah.
that date changed for 3 years, the last time.
what's his date right now?
Well, doesn't,
Just asking.
he wouldn't,
He wouldn't tell you.
he doesn't know. He just doesn't, I mean, it
Oh, because
depends.
he's building it on spec, so he doesn't have to have a customer in there.
The archdiocese wants to get rid of the property.
No, I
That's
know
a
the whole
known-
story,
That's a
sure.
known entity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're gonna continue to negotiate with them even beyond deadline dates that don't get met.
Yeah, they dropped the price, which is another indication that they're really
Okay.
finally desperate to get rid of it.
So if we don't make the next town meeting, that doesn't mean the deal's lost.
It could, but I don't, it could very well be.
Okay.
I think the fundamental point is, though, and Aaron said it, he spent 3 years on a committee with this property, and we ended up with no development proposal. It's a piece of property that is clearly identified in the town as a redevelopment piece of property for some commercial industrial use of some sort to add to the tax base, that we don't have a lot of commercial industrial, so if we don't kind of move a little bit to figure out a plan to move it along, we're still gonna be in the same spot.
Yeah, I spent 6 years during those 3 years on that committee. All right,
All right, so what's
let's
next?
move on
let's
to
move
update B1 zoning. I guess that's you, sir.
We don't have an update because we haven't met, so that's the
All right, moving along quickly. Housing.
Next meeting is March 23rd. March 23rd.
All right.
All right.
Housing choice grant, sir, you want to say anything about that?
Quick update, the Woburn and Kern has been pulling all the information together from existing plans and permitting, and they'll be ready to start doing some analysis on the plant design flows, but we're not there yet. So, stay tuned for more.
Stay tuned. All right, next item, Mill River Heights, Ariana Lane insurance bond.
Well, I haven't heard from Mr. DiMartino, and Betsy was busy today. She wasn't able to call for me, but that's okay. So we'll carry it over. I almost took it off, but we'll carry it there.
No, we should carry it. All right, B1, we just did that. There's three, there's three other items. It's not on, they're written in invisible ink here.
Unanticipated.
Unanticipated new business. Rich is going to give us a quick update on Old Cart Path and Redwood Circle.
Yeah, so Redwood Circle is off
Day Street.
Off Day Street.
Old Cart Path is off Stop River.
Off of Stop River. So they're building the last house on Redwood Circle right now. So that road, I'll reach out to the developer, should be in position to finish it and be done with it and get the road accepted, not languish on. So I'll be reaching out to them. Old Car Path, similarly, it's been languishing for many years. There was concerns by the pace of the construction, the way the construction has been going on. I reached out to Todd Ruane, who lives there, but also is doing the roadway work with Norfolk County Homes, and they're starting to complete the construction. We're gonna have a site visit. I'm gonna try to get out there this week with DPW to go over it, just to make sure they're following the plans, because there's things that they haven't done yet on the plan. I wanna make sure they're on the right path. And told them they need to get cracking, otherwise it might be before the board to recommend pulling the bond to finish it. Obviously, the preference is not to do that, if we can, so they're working. So I'll come back with a report April 14th.
Okay, and the last item is something that you need to tell the board about, what our next step is on Fern Ridge.
There was a settlement offer submitted to the town for Fern Ridge by Lou Petrosi, who was a Wall Street Development. We'll have to put that on the agenda for the planning board.
For the April.
For the April meeting, under executive session, because it's pending litigation, so we can't discuss the terms of the settlement in open meeting, so that.
Did we also hear that the trial is coming up?
In I think it's May, if I recall, that they have to start pre-trial, I think starts, or discovery?
Discovery?
Not a astute law.
I don't think any of you were on the board at the time. Were you? You there? Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
your sins.
So anyway, we'll have
I wasn't.
I think I was sitting at the end, I'm not sure.
Huh?
I don't know, there's certain names on the suit. Wall Street sued the town, sued the planning board.
So you're on it.
I'm on it, I know that. John's on it.
You were on it? Boy, it must have been, you're
I got the
right
letter.
out of the box then.
Yeah.
All right.
Nice and early.
Trial
I
by
tried to
fire.
abstain, but it didn't work.
Right on your new term as a planning board member. And then John, so.
But all roses since.
Yeah, so, anyway, we'll have that on as an agenda item. I might as well ask now, because we have things slotted in at 7. Well, I suppose we could do it at the end, I guess.
Do it at the end.
Yeah, we'll do it at the end. That's fine. Never mind.
Okay, I've run out of items under unanticipated new business. Do we have anything else? Sir?
Can we get an update on Bristol Pond, where we're at?
Sure. So Bristol Pond got a price for the install, the run the conduit, having an electrician wire up the lights, put in the pedestals, and so forth from a contractor. I'll not use contractor's name for,
No, I understand.
but,
Okay.
and he thought the price was extremely high, so he's reached out to another contractor to do the same work. I haven't heard back, I gotta get an update from him, but essentially there's hasn't been much movement on the lighting. As far as where we left off, the board did grant the waiver on the tree caliber size for the trees. The road is top-coated. The road does need to be moved at some point towards acceptance. But the board is still holding the bond, which I think is 200-some thousand, up for exact amount, and a lot as well, but
We released a lot.
The last one?
there's one lot.
I
Still
think we
being held.
still hold one lot.
There's still one lot being held.
We released it.
Nah, you didn't do it.
Well, for next meeting, could you
Give
give an update? I think you're right. I think, if I recall correctly, the lighting was the last piece.
Yeah.
But can you just verify that?
Okay.
And then also if there's one lot or no lots.
I think there's one lot.
I
still
think
left.
there's one, but just a quick summary of where we're at.
Sure.
It seems to be just lingering out there.
There's one lot left for sale, I know
If
that.
there was a lot, she'd be here in front of us.
Well, I'll verify, but I'm pretty sure there's another one.
I don't, yeah, that's why I asked the question.
Sure,
Yep.
yep. Can't spell covenant, but yeah.
Okay, any other things that we need to discuss this evening?
Nope.
Sir, anything else?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So